So, Dr. Katie Grogan, thank
That's
you
right.
for doing an episode with me here in the Bwindi Impenetrable Forest area, specifically Buhoma.
That's right.
Yeah, we're currently sitting at the hospital using one of their boardrooms.
We're fancy.
And I have been here for 5 weeks already, volunteering with the IT team, exploring the local area, enjoying the forest. It's crazy how much time has passed already. My friends were here. I originally came out with them, some Mayo Clinic students.
Mm-hmm.
And Katie's been here the whole time, and so we've been hanging out every day. We have 3 square meals together, basically. And yes,
Sometimes he doesn't sit at my table, and it's very sad.
yeah, I think we bring a lot of culture to
Exactly.
the place.
A lot of class. A lot of class.
I think
Yep.
between the two of us, we're the loudest ones
Oh my God.
at the dinner table because we got a lot of international people that stay at the guest house, and
Yep.
yeah. So I've been volunteering with the IT team, but Dr. Grogan here, she's been working on a research project in the local area with which university?
University of Cincinnati.
University of Cincinnati.
Yep. In Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States.
All right.
Yep.
Excellent. It's good to have you here. You've been coming to this area for a long time, right?
I thought it was a long time. And then the more I talk to people at the guest house, I'm like, oh, I've only been here for a few years. Everyone else has been coming here for 20. Oops.
Yeah, but you've been coming here for 10 years, though.
It's not quite that long.
Not that long?
The first time I came here was 2019.
Okay.
I came for a week in 2019, and then for 3 weeks in 2022, and now I've been here for 7 weeks. I'm unclear, somewhere around in there. Got another month to go. And I also have spent a lot of time. So I've been working on getting this project going since 2019, and have spent a lot of time on Zoom meetings on the other side of this boardroom.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all in the boardroom, and then I'm back in the States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yesterday I had the pleasure of going out with you on one of your research trips where you took blood samples from some locals, and we gave out some food, and I did a nice little tour of some of the places where people live, some indigenous. But it's pretty clear to me there's like so much history in this area, and you didn't choose this place randomly, so. I think we can go into maybe the background of, what makes this place so special. And
so Bwindi Impenetrable Forest, right now, as it is, it's a national park in Uganda, supported by WHO and a few other, IMF, I think, International Monetary Fund. And it was gazetted officially as a park in 1991 to conserve the endangered mountain gorillas, of which there were like 400 at the time. That part has been massively successful. They're up to almost 1,000 in the park, which is very exciting because mountain gorillas are found only here and in Congo and Rwanda. Right.
So all in this region.
All in this
Congo
region.
is to the west, Rwanda is to the south.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that park actually started a lot earlier than that. So back when this was a British colony, the park was originally set up in like the 1920s. But it wasn't very well protected. And so there was a lot of encroachment.
Poaching.
A lot of poaching, or just a lot of burning, a lot of cutting down the forest and turning it into farmland. Everyone I talk to here says that the whole valley actually used to be, or not valley, because we're surrounded by mountains, but most of this area used to be rainforest up until 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I had not put this together until I was talking about it with a colleague, but conservation efforts, especially for gorillas, got a really big boost in 1989 with the release of Gorillas in the Mist.
The story about or a movie?
It's a movie.
Okay.
With who's in it? Oh God. A very famous actor whose name or actress whose name I'm completely forgetting. But Diane Fossey, right? Do you know the story of Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall and
Yes, actually.
Okay.
She taught Jim sign language, right?
No, quite close. Almost.
It's a different one.
Jane Goodall was the very first person to study wild chimpanzees.
Oh, okay.
And was the first person to observe them using tools and doing all this very cool stuff. She was part of a trio
Wait, I know something about this.
Okay,
Right? It's the
do tell.
stick with the ants, right?
Yes, yes.
And then the rock with
they go
the
fishing
shells.
into ant hills with a stick.
Yeah.
They strip it of its leaves and use it as a fishing rod to pull out ants. Yes. So Jane Goodall was part of a trio that was sent to Africa and to Borneo by a very famous paleontologist named Louis Leakey. Louis Leakey met these three women. Jane was like 18 when he sent her to Gombe, where she studied the chimps. And she worked for like a decade to habituate them and has just started the Jane Goodall Institute, very famous, right? Dian Fossey did the same thing with gorillas in Rwanda. So he sent her to Rwanda to help, study the mountain gorillas. And she unfortunately was murdered. Unclear by who. They never caught the person. They say it was poachers. That's the story. And that's what I think the movie suggests.
Do you get a lot of enemies when you're like just studying animals and advocating
because poaching's a big deal. Poaching, the wildlife trade now is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Like tropical fish, I know that.
Tropical fish, Chinese medicine, rhino horns, elephant tusks, pangolin scales, baby gibbons, endangered tortoises, you name it. Wildlife trade is, I want to say, second only to drugs in terms of illegal activity. And it is in terms of like how much money you make, because there's very little enforcement. And so
really, after all this,
very, very little enforcement. And because it doesn't hurt anyone but places and animals that people don't care about, right? So Dian Fossey, she made a lot of enemies. And there's some evidence that she also got into a lot of fights with the local tribespeople, who were, some of them, new poachers.
Probably getting paid on the side a little bit, maybe.
And
the other way.
My understanding is that her heart was in the right place at first, but she may have kidnapped some local villagers and tortured them for information on the poachers.
What kind of research assistant is this, or researcher is this?
Don't disagree. She had at that point become really a conservation activist.
Conservation terrorist, eco-terrorist.
And so it's possible she got killed by the local people because she was kind of being a horrible person. All of that is a totally side story to say that Gorillas in the Mist came out and was a big deal.
Right.
It wasn't, I can see her face, the actress. Anyway, it was a really big, it made a huge splash. And amazingly, 2 years later, the International Monetary Fund found money to conserve the gorillas. And at that point in conservation circles, people were engaged in what's called fortress conservation, where basically, if we're going to conserve this area, no one can go in or out. We're going to make it a fortress. We're going to guard it. We're going to protect it from poachers, et cetera. And that's what they did here. And as far as the Ugandan government, and then they were going to bring in ecotourism and charge people a lot of money to go trekking with the gorillas. And as far as the Ugandan government, that has been wildly successful, right?
Oh yeah, the tourists are paying around $750, $800 per license to see the gorillas
for 1 hour.
I got a tour of one of the bigger, more popular resorts in the area. It's right on the jungle. It has the river going through, kind of all the amenities that you're looking for as a tourist. But it's $1,500 a night. And a lot of those resorts aren't even owned by even people in Uganda.
None of them are owned by people in Uganda.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bidding war, that the Ugandan people lost a long time ago. So now this money's going directly. I hear South Africa is a big place that's sucking out the money.
Saudi Arabia, other places. Yeah, the USA.
But the Ugandan government themselves are the ones who primarily benefit from the licenses. And a lot of that money goes back to Kampala in some way. Almost none of it makes it to the locals here.
Very, very little of it makes it here. There is an agreement that some of the money will come back to the community. But how community is defined is quite broad.
Very broad. So I was talking to Dr. Kellerman about this, actually, and he had a meeting with some local officials. Dr. Kellerman's the guy who started this whole building that we're sitting in about 20 years ago. He built this hospital off of donation money. And a lot of Americans and, foreigners, tourists come and see the gorillas. And then Dr. Kellerman meets with them while they're here and convinces them to donate to the hospital. And now this hospital has about 3 births a day, is what they support, several thousand patients.
100,000 people, no, 200,000 people in the Kanungu district, which is where we are. They provide services.
Yeah. I hope to sit down and talk to Dr. Kelman about this too for the podcast episode.
So cool.
He is.
Oh my gosh.
He's an amazing guy.
Yeah.
I heard so much about him, and once I heard that he was coming, just a few weeks, after I arrived, I felt like, wow, what a blessing.
Gotta stick around. You gotta stick around and meet
Scott.
Scott.
Stick around and meet.
Gotta meet Dr. Scott. Yep.
Yeah. So, but anyway, what they do provide, what the Uganda government does provide here, and Dr. Kelman was telling me this, was security. So they have. I made a mistake earlier. I was walking with Xander and I was walking with my friends, and we took a wrong turn in the park. We walked up this hill, and it was an entire military camp. They had 240s. They had, the M16 rifles. They had armored Humvees with giant mounted machine guns. They were living in tents basically, and they're friendly. They had smiles on their face, but clearly not a place to take pictures and hang out. But anyway, that's what they do, right? And they're defending the forest. So, from what I gather, it's partially because the Congo has so much unrest in it. M23, I think they call it, is the terrorist group there that's working to overthrow the Congo government.
It's one of them. It's one of them. It's the one that's most active right now and is currently in Goma, I believe, has taken over one of the cities. But there are more than, there's a lot. So
the Uganda government does pay for the security around here to protect the forest from poachers and terrorist organizations galore. And to protect tourists, of course.
But I was going to say, to be clear, they're mostly protecting the tourists.
Yes.
Less protecting the forest.
Well, they're going to defend the gorillas too.
Yeah. But there is still a little bit of poaching that happens here. And so, they do provide an important service. And they also, not just from DRC, rebel groups, but also, as I learned on my very first hike to the waterfall, not the one we did, but in 2022, there are fairly aggressive forest elephants that no one had mentioned to me, despite having spent several days walking through the forest. And the guards are there also to scare away the forest elephants because...
You wouldn't want to stare one of those down. I'm shocked because the rainforest, right? Very dense, full of trees. Elephants are big. And I've seen a moose walking through the forest in northern Minnesota. I've seen moose several times. And those things are not subtle. When you get to a certain size, you're just pushing down trees.
And that's how the elephants do it.
Yeah.
They just make a path.
They just crush.
And I almost didn't believe them, except when we went to the waterfall, they showed us elephant poop on the trail.
Yeah, we had proof. Proof of life.
Yeah. No.
And I looked around, and it's like all the trees were intact, but this pile of scat was just huge.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. It was enormous.
It would be really cool to see them, but maybe from a distance. But
from one of the lodges up on the second floor.
But the data is around 20,000 people a year come to see the gorillas, and they pay their $800 license, right? So just doing that math, it comes out to around $16 million in revenue a year. Some of that gets carved off to pay for security forces. Some of it gets carved off to pay for the tour guides, but the rest of that's going back to Kampala.
Yep.
And it leaves places and hospitals like this to be funded purely by tourist dollars. There's really not much.
Or by donation, you mean? By like a foundation.
Donation of people that are not part of the Ugandan government.
Right.
It seems to me, this is more stuff that I'll get into with Dr. Kelman, but it seems to me like the people here have kind of been abandoned. And this story actually has kind of a dark twist. I think that's where we're heading with all this discussion. So
when they gazetted the park, so the park in one way has been a massive conservation success, right?
For the animals.
For the animals, and that's why we say conservation success. We don't usually worry about conserving people. As a conservation success, a conservation story, it's been absolutely wonderfully successful. It has stopped people from cutting down the rainforest. I mean, that likely, had they not gazetted the park when they did, there would not be a rainforest here anymore. Because if you drive around, as you've seen, it's all farmland, right? It's all matoke farms and cattle grazing and coffee.
No, it's not matoke. Okay, coffee.
Coffee, tea,
is big. Coffee and tea are the
matoke and cattle grazing, right? Yeah. It's all, and eucalyptus plots.
I will say I've seen so many goats, so many freaking cows everywhere.
Yep.
It's crazy.
And
Chicken.
the sheep that look like goats but are not. They're just hairier.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so the park is still standing because of that action. However, because we were in the midst of this, at the time what we did was fortress conservation, the Ugandan government decided that the indigenous people that lived in the rainforest, here in Western Uganda, they're called the Batwa, or actually they're called the Twa. And Ba means like community of, or like the plural, right? So technically it's the Twa people or the Batwa. And then a singular person is a Mutwa, so an individual Twa.
I just know them as the Batwa.
Yeah.
Because I've got that English speaking brain. That's what I've been hearing. So there's really two groups of people here from what I gather. There's the Batwa, which used to live in the forest. They lived there for how many tens of thousands of years?
We don't know exactly, but long enough to have a lot of adaptations to the forest. So we know that they split off from the Eastern African hunter-gatherers at least 40,000 years ago. Wow. So that likely means they've been in the forest for somewhere between 10 and 40,000 years, or maybe even longer, honestly. And they have like a lot of physical and physiological adaptations to the forest. So, for example,
I know you're excited to talk about that.
Okay, come back.
But what year were they evicted then?
1991. 1991. They were evicted in. So actually, before I tell you, I'm going to tell you about the adaptation because this is why. So the Batwa they're physically different from us. Like literally, I mean, they're still people. They're still same DNA, etc. But Matthew, how tall are you?
I am 6 foot.
6 foot. I'm 5'2", and I am reasonably tall for a Batwa man. Right, a Mutwa man on average somewhere around 5'1". A Mutwa woman 4'7", 4'8".
Is that getting into the pygmy territory?
Yeah. So these almost all rainforest hunter-gatherers across the globe. You find them in South America, Southeast Asia, and Central Africa. They used to be called pygmies. We actually don't use that term anymore because it's.
Is it derogatory?
It is derogatory.
Oh man!
So we don't use that term anymore.
All right, I've learned.
Yes. So,
but that's funny because I met somebody yesterday, and he said that
they use it here.
Yeah, that
they use it here.
Okay. Should I inform people that their self-labeling is offensive to them? We
try to let the Batwa choose their own terms, right?
Yeah. Their English is working. So.
Yeah. I don't call them pygmies. I don't call them pygmies in any of my scientific writing or talking.
Is there any value to that, a scientific term that describes people below a certain height, or no?
Not really. I mean, everybody under 5 foot. Like, how do you make that distinction?
I don't know. Maybe this is a bit of a distraction, but we love those. Is pygmy like an island somewhere? Does it have like an origination?
I actually have no idea where that term came from.
Well, maybe
not a clue.
Help me at some point, but no worries.
Yeah, not a clue.
Outdated term. Got it. But anyway, they're very small people.
They're very small.
Adaptation.
Right, and we're pretty sure that is an adaptation to, because the jungle is so dense, like ridiculously dense. And even the Batwa, when you tell them like. It's an adaptation because the forest is really dense and that helps you, move through. They laugh. Like we saw this yesterday. They laugh and they're like, absolutely. Of course, that's what it's for.
Because Mzungos, like us, that's the native term for the gringos or the white folk or the tourists.
That's right.
They call us Mzungos, I don't know. I don't speak any
Ruchiga.
of the Ruchiga
That's the language here.
But you definitely hear a lot of laughter whenever they say the word Mzungu. Yep. There's always something that they're making fun of. You hear
a lot of chatter, Mzungu. Ha 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 ha. And you're like, talking about me. Cool. Hey
talking
guys.
About me or somebody like me. Yeah. But the Mzungos, we all need machetes to get through the forest. Yeah, it's too dense.
It's too dense.
You can't get through it.
So the Batwa lived there long enough that they were physically changed by the forest. However, at the time, in the 90s, the Ugandan government, the narrative actually was that they were colonial refugees, that they had been pushed into the forest.
Fake news.
They had been pushed into the forests by British colonists in the 1850s and up to the 1900s as they expanded and then pushed the Bachiga this way. And then that pushed the Batwa into the forest.
That's the second group of people around here, right?
Yes, the Bachiga is, yeah.
So I call them, so we're in Buhoma right now. So I affectionately call people Buhomies. But technically
they are a group of agriculturalists that that came here from West Africa sometime between 2,000 and 5,000 years ago. And so anyway, at the time in 1990, the Uganda government was like, they're colonial refugees. They aren't supposed to be in the forest anyway. So they literally kicked them out at gunpoint in December 91.
So was there like money that was on the line? Like there was money coming from foreign groups that says we want to conserve this square area, but the condition is it has to be a conservation area, so no people.
No, there has never been a thing like an agreement that said, oh, there can't be people in the forest.
Right.
Right. The Ugandan government decided that the people could not be in the forest. And their justification was that they hadn't really been there very long. They didn't belong there in the first place. And then the second justification was that the Batwa are rainforest hunter-gatherers. They don't farm, right? They hunt and gather. That's it. A lot of their hunting is done with bows and arrows and also snares. And occasionally those snares catch a gorilla. Mostly babies, they catch a foot, and they starve to death, right?
Right.
And so the government's argument was, if the Batwa are still in the forest, we're defeating our own purpose, right? Because we're trying to conserve the gorillas, and we've got a group of people in there who are setting traps, and they're dying.
So there's part of this that makes sense, but I think you got to have like a multi-stage plan. You can't just evict people based on whatever pretense you got.
We are not saying that the eviction was a horrible conservation idea, but from a human ethics standpoint, the way they did it, right, was to evict them at gunpoint with what they could carry, and they were given nowhere to go and no compensation for being evicted from this land that the government basically eminent domain.
Yeah. So
right?
the currency here is shillings. These people didn't use shillings in the 90s, as far as I know. It was kind of like a bartering.
Probably around here, yeah.
Yeah,
much more bartering.
And we say the Batwa like maybe there was a city or something. No, we're talking about maybe they had little disparate groups of people that maybe they didn't even all identify as one people. They could have just identified with their tribe or their family.
They mostly did identify as Batwa, but they were a nomadic hunter-gatherer, right? Like if you're hunting and gathering, you can't stay in the same place for a super long time. You like run out of food very quickly. And so they were just sort of nomadic, moved through the forest with their family group or 10 people, etc. And in fairness, like some of them had lived outside the forest. They understood money. They know what it is, right? And they know about land ownership of other people owning land, right? They didn't consider themselves owners of the forest. They considered themselves to have a very special relationship with the forest, but not like, we own this.
Well, after 10,000 to 40,000 years, I mean...
Right. So they got evicted, and because they were not given any money to compensate them for the loss of their livelihood, and because they were not given any place to go, they became literal landless squatting refugees on people's farms. And what it meant was, before that, the average life expectancy was like 48 years old. But after the eviction, like most of the children who were under the age of 8 starved to death. And so the average life expectancy went down to 26 for nearly a decade. And if you go to the Batwa settlements, you kind of saw this, I think, maybe yesterday or the other day. Like, you go and there are many elderly people.
There are a few, yeah. I noticed maybe 5 out of the 35.
Yeah, we had 20, 30 people, and there were, but when I say elderly, I mean 45 and above.
Oh, well, then I would up that number to 10, perhaps.
Yes. And then there are some that are like 18. There are lots of teenagers and lots of 18 to 25, maybe 30. There aren't a lot of people from 30 to 45 because those were the kids when they were evicted.
Right.
And so if you look around, you can sort of, you might see a few, but there aren't many.
Is that going to be in your data? Is that going to be a part
We're not collecting samples from that
based
group.
On age.
We are.
But you're collecting data based on the ages of your participants.
I'll get to that.
Okay.
We are, if you sort of look around, you'll notice that there's just not that many middle-aged people. I don't know.
Right.
People like my age. I'm almost 40. So yeah. So anyway, so they got evicted. They spent almost a decade just basically starving to death and working for whatever they could and moving around and trying to find places to live. Right. But like, there's a lot of bigotry against them, in part because their culture is different, ownership is different.
But bigotry from whom?
From the indigenous the other groups that are here. So from
right.
the
So Uganda has about 40 native languages that are spoken here.
And like 60 tribes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so English, right, is kind of the common language, came about from the colonial days. And it used to be, before English or the colonialism aspect, whichever language was spoken was kind of like the cultural dominance in the area. So if you were the more important person in the room, you spoke your own language, made other people speak.
Everybody spoke. Yeah.
But now everybody's learning English.
Everyone speaks English.
But I will say, been here for 5 weeks, 6 weeks, what have you, and we're all speaking English, but my accent is hard for them to understand, and vice versa. But if we speak slowly, that's the one thing that I've really learned from Ugandans, and maybe being with you brings out my loud aspect. But when I speak with the locals, I speak very slowly and very softly as well. Like, there could be power tools going on, there could be hammering, there could be any amount of noise, and we might even be sitting far away from each other. But if you're speaking to a Ugandan, they're basically, it feels to me like whispering.
Yeah.
Because I come from that military army background where people wanted to communicate, they only were going to say it once, and they were going to say it real loud. And if it made anybody repeat anything, it was bad news. But it's crazy how patient everyone is here, and how softly and just really slowly they speak. And it reminds me of like Tolkien and the Ents, where it's like, we don't say anything unless it's worth saying and taking the time to say it.
Interesting, because I have spent most of my time, you've spent most of your time here at the hospital, interacting with people who are either Bachiga or are more from Kampala or Mbarara or one of the other tribes, right? They're not from this area. They've come here to work at the hospital. I spend most of my time in the Batwa settlements, speaking to the Batwa. And like you observed this yesterday, I personally think they speak very fast. There's usually a lot of talking happening all at the same time, right? And there often can be a lot of yelling. And so to me, the
Batwa are different in this regard.
Yeah.
I had
that's my sort of experience has been.
I suppose I did notice that as well.
Yesterday was a pretty small group. Yeah. It was, when you get up to 40 or so Batwa, like it just, it's like being in a high school dance or something. Like it's just all the talking all the time. And it's a lot of fun. They break into dance sometimes.
I can tell they have a lot of fun, because we're talking about doing blood samples, right? And they're like, "Are you gonna drink the blood?
Oh my gosh,
inject the blood? What are you gonna do with our blood?" Because you can't explain DNA to them. So I'm dealing with students at the nursing school down the road. I deal with the people at the hospital here, and just explaining like email and how to do an attachment, and what it means when the Wi-Fi is not working or not working on their own device. I've seen such a wide variety of devices here too, because in the States it's pretty narrowed down. You got your cell phones and smartphones that are usually over the $300 range, going up to maybe the 25 to $3,000 range. But here, I think it's like the average price of a smartphone is probably around $120. Not much lower than that, but really not much higher either. So lots of Huawei.
You can get them for like 50 or 60 if you get a really cheap one. Yeah.
Well, maybe I don't like to believe you can buy a smartphone for that cheap.
I mean, you can't buy a smartphone that's going to last of any kind. Yeah. Yeah. But you can.
But just teaching even these people, right, that they have the technology, they have the exposure to the internet, even just getting the basics across. Like I did a class recently. Just 2 days of class. So I did the practical aspect. The nursing students, or the physicians, they're all required to do one IT class, which is like a semester of, this is a keyboard, this is a mouse. And then the practical stuff I taught, and the practical stuff that we did was like, how do you copy and paste an image out of Google? How do you start a slideshow presentation? How do you do this? How do you do that? And I will say some things I thought, they picked up really quickly. And some students are obviously having more experience than others. Some are more interested. I think that's probably true in any classroom, no matter what you're teaching. But just getting across like how to copy and paste, it's like I'm a wizard.
And like finding the language, right? You say like you need to copy and paste an image, and we know that you mean electronically, right? But like for them, some of them get it, and some of them are like, you mean like go make a copy and then like cut it out and paste it somewhere, and you're like, no, that's not what I meant. That's never mind.
So this is all to say that describing DNA to the Batwa, who I'm going to post some videos about what I saw in the community and how they're living. But this is a place without electricity or running water, mostly mud and stick houses. The revolutionary building materials has been brick lately, which they build out of the local clay.
Well, so okay, so after they got evicted, you should, when you talk to Scott Kellerman, talk to him about how he got started here and how that happened.
Oh yeah.
But basically, in this area, Scott Kellerman started a foundation that has a partner organization here called the Batwa Development Program, and they acquired land for the Batwa. They've taught them how to farm. They've built them houses, first the mud and stick, and now they're working on providing brick houses for everyone, providing pit latrines, all of those things. But like those are all things that like when they got evicted, they did not know how to do, right? Like that's not a thing they'd ever had to do. If you're going to make a house in the forest, it's with some leaves and some sticks and into a tree and you're done, right? Yeah. You're not growing anything, none of those things. And so all of that was new to them. It was very difficult. Now they're doing a lot better. The BDP, so Batwa Development Program, or BDP, also pays for all of the kids to go to school.
I noticed that all the kids left.
Because school started on February 3rd. So all the kids went to school. It pays for the Batwa to receive healthcare here at the hospital. It pays for their land, the purchase of agricultural tools, and the brick making machines that they can put together these brick houses. And they're kind of, I mean, for Ugandan standards, they're like reasonably nice houses.
Oh, yeah. I got to look inside, and I took some videos inside. I think their next step is probably like some sort of mattress pad, because I feel like they got sticks and they got cardboard, and then they might throw a rag on top of it. And I mean, if you look at these people, they don't really have much fat on them for obvious reasons, but they're pretty like muscular, right?
Oh my gosh.
You still got to take care of your back though.
And it's been interesting because the first time I came here, the settlements we visited, very, very few people had shoes. Like
Nobody
few.
Yesterday had shoes, bro.
Oh yeah, they did.
Yeah. But so we should tell the story of what happened yesterday though. I don't know if you want to.
We're going to come back. Okay. All right. Yeah, so they're doing better. They every year I've come back, more people have had shoes versus the first time when I came, literally no one had shoes.
Well, I saw one person with shoes yesterday.
Yeah. So the guys don't tend to wear shoes nearly as much. The women tend to wear shoes a little bit more. But yeah, so yesterday we went out to work on my research project, which we'll get to in a second. But the Batwa are ridiculously hard workers.
It's crazy. And they have such a bad rap with the locals too.
Now I will say some of that is slightly deserved in the sense that the Batwa tend to be a lot more in the moment. They're not a whole lot of like, let's save for the future, right? Like they tend to be much more like immediate decision making. And so it can be difficult to explain to them like that you need to save money for a long time to do a thing, right? And so they're sorry. There's a lot of discrimination because of that. They also tend to drop out of school very early, often to have children. And so there's a lot of discrimination because of that. And they also, because of the trauma of getting evicted, there's a rampant problem with alcoholism and domestic violence in many of the settlements. And so they then, so like it started with, they're illiterate, right? Yeah. And they're, just these like weird people who live in the jungle, and now they're out of the jungle.
Well, they used to be squatters too.
And then they were squatters, right? And they're homeless. And so all the stigma that comes with that, right? And they're pretty easily identifiable because they're so small. So
there is a strong culture that I've noticed in Uganda, at least the people I've interacted with here, which is definitely probably a certain class of people. but
the educated
Ugandans. Yeah. But there's a sentiment, right, that there should be no handouts ever for anyone. It doesn't matter if it's United States foreign aid. It doesn't matter if it's the Ugandan government helping its own people. They believe in self-sufficiency. Basically, every single person, right? So, case in point, Dr. Obed, right? We were talking. I don't know if you catch this little tidbit for him. So Dr. Obed is native Ugandan, been working at the hospital for 20 years.
Yep.
Him and his family own huge amounts of land around here. He makes jokes about all of his involvements with many a shady dealing. I don't know how much of it's real, but love the guy. He's great. We go drinking sometimes. He beats me in pool or lets me win, depending on how he feels. But what he said was, we were telling him about what we did yesterday and how we gave posho, which is cornmeal, and beans and soap and sugar and these things compensate people for participating in the research. And he's like, why not give them seeds? And I'm like, Dr. Obed, please, it's 3 days worth of food. Can we just like take a breath, like not worry about, because I actually bought some produce from them, right? Like they were pretty proud of that. You were still doing your stuff with the centerfold.
You bought a really awesome jackfruit.
Yeah, and then brought it home. They cut it up at the guest house. People tried it. I think I got mixed reviews. I think you really have to eat posho. I'm sorry, not posho. Jackfruit, like as soon as it comes out of the plant.
Okay.
Because it's like, when you slice up a banana and you leave it out for 20 minutes, it starts to get brown. That's basically what jackfruit.
I'm telling you, jackfruit though, with barbecue. Can be well barbecued.
I asked David about that. So David is our local hero at the guest house. He's the manager of the guest house staff.
He makes everything happen. He makes the magic happen.
Yep, yeah. He's a local, but you can tell that he cares a lot about what he does. And, but anyway, I gave him the jackfruit. I said, do what you can with it. If you can cook it, cook it. And he's like, nah, we eat this raw. And and nobody I'd talked to. Admittedly, 2 people I talked to, nobody had it cooked, so you're alone in that.
That's fair.
I'm excited.
Yeah, Obed is funny, and many people here are funny. I mean, and it's true that the people we're talking to at the hospital tend to be the much more well educated, and and as well, they are much wealthier than most of the people in Buhoma. Your Buhomies.
The Buhomies.
Buhomies. And isn't it nice to know that everywhere, people who are quite wealthy are like, you should pull yourself up by your bootstraps, just like I did. And you're like, sure. Okay.
It is interesting because when you're at the guest house, right, the people you'll see every day for dinner, well, these are like the heads of departments. These are like the directors. Like Dr. Kellerman hangs out here. Dr. Kellerman is like a provincial celebrity. The guy lifted mountains to bring healthcare to the people here. Under absolutely no help
under a tree.
Yeah, like I was talking to him about this yesterday, but he was like, I was this close to becoming a Ugandan citizen, and then I decided not to because it's in bad taste for him to own land. So what he did, right? Is he got the donors together. They cut checks for however many millions of dollars to get this place started. And then he bought the land under the name of the local bishop.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the church owns all the land that we're sitting on right now. And there's a contract or some sort of agreement, written, verbal, what have you, that says as long as the hospital continues to function as a hospital under this mission, the church will let you use the land.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's very tenuous, right? Because obviously Dr. Kellerman's the funding behind it. And he's the one. So he was telling me this last night, right? So the operating budget here is $1.5 million
every year. Yep.
And which means, and this place brings in maybe $300,000 from what I calculated, because I was an IT admin, right? So I had access.
So you had access to all.
I had access to
the
financial info, and I looked at the average, and that was kind of what I don't know if this is classified info, but hello.
Oops.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is Dr. Kellerman and his foundation
provide about $1 million.
Provide the gap funding. Yep. And then any new funding, right, for the school. He told me that was around $750,000 to make the school happen, and now we have a new dental and vision and eye clinic that's coming. Opinions.
I love how you say we. That's awesome. Yes, you said we have a new dental and vision thing, which is super
working
adorable. I love it.
weeks.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
I feel like I know a little bit.
That's the thing that happens here.
I did the floor plan for the IT floor plan for the
dental
eye and vision clinic. So I know where the access points should go and where the workstations and the printers and they're obsessed with smart boards.
I know.
I feel like that's a mistake. I think smart boards have always been a huge pain. I was there when they first started rolling out in the States. Colossal waste of time. You know what's really good? Overhead projectors.
Whiteboards.
Stick with the good stuff. Stick with the things that are analog. I'm like a cybersecurity guy, like background with Lockheed Martin and Space Force. Let me tell you, analog is the best way to do anything.
Well, but even just for here, because of the humidity and the heat. Right? Like
and the power goes out.
No, so it is interesting to me that people here, I mean, so we are here as the U.S. government has just cut U.S. aid, right?
Yeah.
Like just it's gone. And the hospital used to receive U.S. aid funding for HIV patient. And it's interesting because we were all horrified that this was happening.
Like the
Mzungu
types
were horrified. And all the Ugandans were like, actually, this is not a bad thing because we really should be standing on our own 2 feet. And I totally.
It's around $940 million of U.S. aid that was coming through Kampala and distributed out.
Yeah.
So it amounts to about 19. So this was crazy, right? At the guest house, I can just talk to the director of the hospital. I can talk to the Kellerman Foundation directly, right? So it's about 19 people, majority of them dealing with HIV and AIDS prevention.
Yeah.
Are going to be staff who are going to be fired because of the change. But on the other hand, right, all like the Mzungos are going to be horrified. Everybody's going to be like, what?
It was also covering medication for about 1,200 patients, right? Which the Uganda government has now agreed to pick up. But at the time when this first happened, everyone was like, oh my gosh, they only have 3 months worth of meds. And then what? But you talk to the Ugandans and they're like, I mean, we really should be covering our own bills. So this is actually a good thing. They would have preferred it to be more of stepped down. But in fairness, the ones you talk to are also the ones like Dr. Obed who have plenty of money, right? And so they're not worried about where their paycheck is coming from. Yeah. He's not on the HIV prevention, staff. And I tried to ask them about how would you feel if the Kellerman Foundation did something similar? And
I think your question was a little poorly worded. Fair. I remember that a couple weeks ago. I felt really bad because, anyway.
he was just like, well, that just won't happen. And I was like, that's not the point.
I definitely want to talk to Dr. Kellerman about this. Is like the guy's 85 years old. He's been carrying mountains on his shoulders, and just the brief little stories. Like corruption is a thing that happens in any organization out here. People take money from the foundation, they disappear with it. There's no repercussions.
Yep.
But the guy's 85, right? And,
but his foundation.
He should think about his legacy. Like there has to be somebody who's going to be out there pounding the ground to get donations.
The foundation.
He's a very unique man. I wouldn't assume that he could just be like.
So the foundation has done has a pretty good mailing list, and a lot of that. Right, he recruits a lot of new donors, but they have a very good pool of donors, and so I'm not. I mean.
So Dr. Kellerman travels around the United States, around the world, doing presentations. And that's part of the reason why I'm even here, right? Is he did a presentation in Rochester, Minnesota for the Mayo Clinic students. Mm-hmm. And that's how Xander and Kashav and Lookman and Dom, that's how they all met Dr. Kellerman and got inspired to come out here. And then they were like, hey, well, Xander specifically, he was like talking about this. And maybe he didn't invite me to come with. I just kind of invited myself. I just figured this is something I want to do, right? I quit my job a little bit ago to do something better with my life. I don't know what it is, but something that's not necessarily just about me.
Yeah, so. Which you've been doing, right? You've volunteered your time for weeks here.
I think it's interesting, right? Is like the volunteers that come through the guest house, they're cardiologists, anesthesiologists, they're mental health professionals, like
physical
they're
therapists,
and then my friends, right? They're the ragtag medical students that are doing rounds and getting quizzed. I think they called it pimping.
Yeah, that is a term I had not heard before.
I think every medical school has a different term for getting grilled.
Yeah.
But as an IT professional, I'm pretty rare. It was kind of weird because we did the tour around the hospital, right? And we had Liz, one of the communications people, doing the tour and introducing us, and she was like, "And here are the medical students, but here's the IT guy."
When you arrived, the first day or second day you guys were here, you were like, I don't really know what I'm going to be doing here. I'm just going to offer my services, but I sort of figure I'll just be at loose ends, whatever. And in my head, I laughed so hard because I was like, they're never going to let this guy go. They're going to try to keep him forever. And indeed, they have tried.
I've gotten multiple offers, but I did buy, so breaking news, I did buy my ticket for Tanzania for next Friday.
Okay. All right. So you got to break it to the director. She's going to be devastated.
Yeah. But, I accomplished a few things that I feel are going to outlast me. And, I've helped in a few ways that I'm proud of. And it's been a really good lifestyle. I think what's interesting, right, is this place kind of feels like we watch Groundhog's Day every Friday at the guest house. We do a PG movie, and the last one we watched, there's so many kids at the guest house. It's nuts because all the doctors that visit bring their whole families, and it's like these people have been coming here for years and years and years, and they all know everybody, and they're much a part of the community as anybody. But anyway, this place kind of feels like Groundhog's Day sometimes. You just wake up, you see the same people. You have like the same weather, beautiful weather, by the way.
Same weather.
And it's probably the food that gets me because I'm like a food guy. But every evening, it's been good lately. But there was like a good 3 weeks there where I think we had goat every night. Every single night.
And saucy beans and rice and matoke. And you're like, could we have? And the only thing that changed really was maybe the soup or the bread.
The soup would change.
But that's
it was always orange soup though.
Yep,
it was like a pumpkin
carrot,
soup,
pumpkin,
or squash. Yeah, so it looked all the same. It had a little bit of a different taste. Sometimes they'd forget salt, so it's fun. So like I got into the habit of just putting salt in it, and then
did you do that with the tomato soup?
I think so, probably.
Ooh. The tomato soup always has plenty of salt in it.
Yeah, the tomato soup slaps though.
Yeah, it's really good.
I love it.
Yeah. There is, I will say, the chefs, I know there was a lot of staff turnover last year, and the chef is new. He was staff, and he's literally been teaching himself to cook. So like for how he's doing, it's actually pretty good food, but it is very similar almost every day.
Well, there was the one day they served goat tongue. And that was probably where I truly lost my appetite. Because it's weird when you put your tongue on something else's tongue. Because you look at it.
And you're not making out with them. It's just, you're like, oh, this is happening.
Well, I don't want to make out with a goat. But it's funny because Kashav, he was all about that goat tongue. He was like, this is just like Nepal.
Oh my God.
That's funny. I hope he watches this.
That's right.
Shout out to my boys. I miss you guys. Why'd you leave me out here?
Thank you for leaving him. He's been very helpful.
Oh yeah. I do my best. I've reset the Wi-Fi several times. It's crazy.
Hey Matthew, I have a computer problem. Can you fix this? Yeah. No.
But anyway, we got so off track from the research. I don't know. We can do like a quick recap.
We'll come back. Yeah. So anyway, so the Batwa, what I research is how being in a changing environment affects our epigenome, right? So you have your genome, which is your DNA, and then your epigenome, which is basically controls how the genome is expressed. So how much, where, and when genes are expressed in your body. And the epigenome is how we get same genome in every cell, but you get skin cells and liver cells and, heart cells and all those things, right? That's what controls how those cells become those things. But the epigenome also is affected if you go from a hot to a cold environment, or not inside to outside.
You gotta dumb this down to infantry level, because you've said epigenome so many times over the last 6 weeks. I have never asked, what the heck are you talking about?
So the epigenome is a set of mechanisms that controls how the genome is expressed as RNA, right? So when you have a gene gets transcribed into RNA, which then gets translated into protein, right? Central dogma? No? None of this is ringing a bell?
Oh my God. Biology.
Okay.
I shoot things.
Basically, your genome is the instruction manual, and your epigenome tells you how to read which parts and how to put it all together.
Okay.
Does that help?
So you're saying the DNA of the Batwa is similar to ours, but the epigenome...
All probably very similar, right? All humans share 99.9
Makes
percent of
human,
the
yeah.
same DNA,
See, but
right?
that's where my conventional knowledge ends, right? You got the dihydronucleic acid. I can pull that off the top of my head.
It was nice. That
I
was
can
nice.
pull
It was
that out.
close. It was close.
Okay, whatever, Professor.
Deoxyribo.
Deoxyribo.
Yes, close.
All right.
But
Nucleic acid.
right.
Got it.
So DNA is what is this. It's always the same in all of your cells, and it's the same from the moment you're conceived until you die, right? That mutations lead to cancer and stuff but like basically your genome is the same. Your epigenome, however, is a series of mechanisms that control what part of the genome gets expressed when and where. And those are very responsive to the environment. So DNA doesn't respond to the environment, but how that DNA is expressed does respond to the environment. And that's the epigenome that's doing that, basically.
Is there something people at home could relate to, perhaps, on how that works in their own life?
There are examples. I'm trying to think of a good one. That puberty might be a good one.
Okay.
Right? Puberty, you have had your DNA
stays the same.
You have genes for estrogen receptor, testosterone receptor, all of those things. You don't need any of those receptors before you have estrogen and testosterone. Right?
So we don't grow them.
No, you don't.
Really?
Turn all of that on.
I didn't even think about this.
When you go through puberty, right?
Okay.
So you turn all those mechanisms on when you go through puberty. And so that's one example. Another example is how your metabolism, right? Like if you start, crazy working out or any of those kinds of like fad diets or whatever that they have, like what that does is changes your physiology, right? And the way your physiology changes is by what in your genome is expressed when and where. Right. So how good your muscles are doing what they need to do, a lot of that is based on what parts of the genome are being expressed in them. So your epigenome changes based on the environment, some parts of it. And some of those changes are major and some of them are minor. But every time you become, there's ghosts. Basically, let's say you stop smoking.
That's me.
That will, part of the way that your body starts to get healthier is when you stop smoking, things in your epigenome change. And so we know that there are lifestyle things that change, that environmental things change. And so the Batwa have a genome that is adapted to the rainforest. It has all of these different adaptations in it, genes that are different from ours, or alleles that are different from ours, that are adapted to life in the rainforest. They no longer live in the rainforest, though. And so for me, I got really interested in how leaving the rainforest, so that they're farming outside. They're basically in what we would consider a genome environment mismatch. You and I are in a genome environment mismatch right now because I'm
sweating like crazy.
We are in Africa, right? Our people are from cold climates, right? With
Not
light skin. And here we don't do as well. The Batwa have left the forest. And it's one of the very few times that a whole population of people has had this kind of environmental change, right? Our ancestors went through this environmental change 100,000 years ago when they went to Europe, 40,000 years ago when they went to Europe. And our ancestors maybe went from farming to industrial work like 100, 200, 300 years ago. So like too late, right? And there are cultures where people are moving to cities or things like that, but it's usually one person at a time.
This is a whole community of people that have a shared genetic ancestry.
Exactly.
And they've all been living in the same kind of environments for 10 to 40,000 years.
Right. And then all of a sudden, at the same time, they all got evicted. And so
this is a limited time frame where you can even
collect samples.
Right.
In part because...
And you're not the only one who's been doing research like this.
On this topic, I am.
Okay.
But so my postdoc advisor originally brought me here first because he was interested in the Batwa's genomic adaptation, so their short stature. He was also interested, they have some immune system differences, how they respond to viruses, because the viruses that are found in the forest are very different from the viruses we would encounter here. So their immune system's a little different, and that's what he was studying. I got interested in the more, like, what's going to happen to the Batwa in the future. And so we're at this sort of inflection point, right, where there are elders who were born in the forest, grew up in the forest, and then as adults transitioned out. And then there's now a whole generation of children who are Batwa, have this genome, but have lived their entire lives outside of the forest. And so I'm here collecting whole blood samples from them. As we say to them, a couple of mouthfuls of water, that's about how much, right? Like because they're constantly asking how much are you going to take? And collecting a blood sample to go home and do basically look at gene expression and the epigenome. And so we've been here collecting samples from Batwa and Bachiga between older than 45, right? So they were adults when the Batwa got evicted. Adults, biologically.
So what you're saying is, their genetics are still probably
definitely still rainforest hunter-gatherer.
Still represent the 40,000 years, right? But if you get people that are younger than 45,
their epigenome might look different.
Yeah, because there's been a lot of contact with the outside.
Well, and also just because they're living a totally different lifestyle.
Right.
Right? Yeah. They're farming, they're eating processed foods, they're going to school, they're, like all
the microplastics.
Exactly. The diseases they've been exposed to, all those things are very different from their parents and how they grew up. And so we're sampling from both 18 to 35, which is post-eviction, but still adults, and then 45 and older, which is before eviction, right? Adulthood before eviction. And then we're sampling from the Bachiga, who are the farmers in this area, because they have lived here for thousands of years. They're living in what we would consider a genome environment match. Right? This is their environment, farming outside. Ideally, we would sample Batwa that still lived in the forest, but there aren't any. Right. So that becomes a problem. And so we have been going out to different Batwa settlements, which are supported by the BDP. That's the
Dr.
land.
Kellerman with the foundation.
Dr. Kellerman and his foundation. That's the land they had bought for the Batwa. And so we've been going out and explaining the project to them, which is, I had done a little bit of that in 2019, talked to some of the settlements, said, are you interested in participating? And they said yes. So then I came back in 2022 and spent 2 weeks going to all the different settlements and talking to all of them and saying, this is the project. Are you interested? Because if you're not, then we're not going to do it, right? We're just, and also, what are your concerns?
But there's a food incentive too.
But right, there is. We'll get to that. But basically, the other thing I really wanted to know from them at the time was what are barriers to you participating? What are your concerns? And there were some very interesting ones. So, for example, BDP helps the Batwa. What if you come back and tell me that I'm not actually Batwa? Right? What if I'm mostly Bachiga? Does that mean I lose access to BDP? So they had those concerns. They had concerns about.
Do you think there are reverse squatters happening?
No, but there are. The Batwa and the Bachiga have been intermarrying occasionally for generations, and so don't tell them, but all of the Batwa have a little bit of Bachiga ancestry, and all of the Bachiga have a little bit of Batwa ancestry too. And every once in a while, you'll get one that's 50, whose one parent was a Bachiga, one parent was a Batwa, was Mutwa, right? And so they're half and half. But we don't identify them. We said, okay, then we won't provide anyone with their individual results so that no one can say to you, you are not Mutwa. You don't, you can't access the BDP's resources. They were concerned about medical testing. And so we're not doing any of that, right? So anyway, so we came back here now in 2025 and we've been collecting samples. We go out almost every day with a crew. It's a whole team.
Oh, yeah.
It's a team in a big van. And we either sample from Bachiga or Batwa, depending on the day. And we gather sort of everybody from the community. We explain the project. We introduce ourselves. And it's me and usually a nurse and a couple of research assistants. And then the head of a nonprofit that I work with called Action for Batwa Empowerment Group, which is run by Sylvia Kokonda, who is Batwa. She's Mutwa. She started this organization back in 2017.
That was the lady carrying the baby around.
That was the lady carrying the baby around.
It's crazy. They got a culture here where if you're going to work and you have a newborn,
baby comes with you.
Baby comes with. Can't be away from the food.
Kayla is 4 months old, and Kayla has come with us every day that Sylvia's been with us. Kayla helped with consent. We often, Sylvia will often write on, Kayla will be on her stomach in Sylvia's lap, and then Sylvia will write on Kayla's back. And it's Absolutely hilarious.
There wasn't any crying?
Nope, she's not a very fussy baby. She's a great baby.
Oh, man.
So we go out, we explain what we're doing, we introduce ourselves, we answer any questions that anybody has, and we got a few that you heard. They asked yesterday if we were going to inject their blood into someone else. We asked, they usually ask if we're going to mix it up, and I was like, no, we're not. They also ask, often they'll ask if we're going to return results. They do not want us doing medical testing on them, and so we have to be very clear that we're not. And then so that's the group discussion. And then each potential participant goes and does a whole consent. They fill out a consent form with a research assistant.
Yeah, it was like 8 pages.
It's very long.
Yeah. It covers everything. Future studies, usage of data, like data retention.
Yep. It covers all sorts of stuff.
Every aspect of it. And it's in English, right?
The version that you saw and that I use in the community discussion is in English. Right. The version that the research assistants go over is in Ruchiga.
But how's the literacy rate with Ruchiga?
That is the other problem. So,
oh man,
we go over the consent form in Ruchiga, and the participant also gets a copy. They sign it, etc. But somewhere around, I'd say 60 to 70% of the Batwa, especially the elders, are all illiterate. The younger people are often more literate, but not that literate. The Bachiga are more literate, so many more of them can actually sign. If they can't sign and they're not literate, we do thumbprints and we have a witness who makes sure that they're, voluntarily participating.
The thumbprint method.
The thumbprint is for anybody who can't sign their name.
It's like the Civil War, enlistment papers.
Yep.
I got that soldier background, so that's what I think of. But,
yep.
It's but they're willing to do it, and sometimes they're fighting over who gets to do it.
They fight over it. So we, after they go through the consent process, they go to the nurse and a blood sample is taken, somewhere between 5 and 8 mils. It's not a whole lot. And then they come out and we give them a gift for their participation time, right? Mm-hmm. So we're not buying their blood sample. We're saying you sat here for anywhere between 3 and 6 hours. Right. We are very grateful. Here is the equivalent of like 3 days' wages of food.
Right. So a day's wage here gets you about 2 days worth of food is kind of what I heard.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So if you give 3 days worth of wages, maybe it's 6 days worth of food.
Something along those lines, although that's usually for one person. Yeah. And we're giving it we give bags of the posho, which is the corn flour, and then bags of beans and bags of sugar and bags of salt.
For those of you that have had grits, that's kind of what posho is, except it's a lot less water in posho when they're done cooking it.
Yeah.
I think it's like a preference. But yeah, posho and beans is a big staple here.
Big staple.
Yeah. And then also matoke, so they have 3 different types of bananas. They have the sweet bananas, which we're familiar with. They have ultra sweet bananas too. They're like the little ones.
Yeah.
Just loaded with sugar. Then they have matoke, which is kind of more like a potato texture. I think the potato has all the vitamins and nutrients you need to live, like straight up. I think matoke.
But they don't eat a lot of potatoes.
No. But matoke, the contrast is I think it's like nutrition void. Like there's nothing. It just fills the stomach. It's like very dense.
Maybe the difference though is that matoke grows pretty year round here, and I don't know if potatoes do.
I'd be surprised if they didn't, but
because of rain is what I mean.
Yeah, and then the third type of banana is what they turn into banana liquor, which they call watajin, or I don't know. There was some British explorer or somebody who came through, had a sip of something. They said it was this native language, and then he was like, watajin, and then the name just took over.
I love that story. That's amazing. I've not heard that before.
Yeah. So the headwaters of the Nile is the Queen Elizabeth Lake, I think it is.
Queen Victoria Lake. So one of the argued sources of the Nile.
One of the argued sources. There's a couple. So I'm just saying there's been colonial influence, certainly. But, they seem to embrace it to a degree.
Yeah. No, so we give them, basically, in the U.S., so we're giving them 5 kilos of posho, the corn maize, 2 kilos of beans, a kilo of salt, kilo of sugar, half a kilo of salt, and a kilo of soap. And all of that costs here about $10 US.
Yeah.
So that's what we give them. And they're usually very grateful because this food they can take home, whereas other researchers often will pay them in food they eat sort of right there. But Sylvia had suggested, no, we should be giving them, things that basically they can take home and use to feed their families. And they're very eager to participate.
They're so eager, right?
They're so eager.
The story for yesterday, though, it was pretty shocking to me, right? So first of all, our bad. We probably weren't using the right vehicle for the terrain. But we had this van. It kind of looked like a Honda Odyssey. So
a little square, but yeah.
Yeah, but it definitely wasn't all-wheel drive. But we got 99% of the way there. I mean, the roads in Uganda are super bad. They're all dirt. There's really no money for infrastructure coming out of the government to fix any of this. Lord knows there's plenty of people that were working, and there is plenty of money to be had because the president of Uganda has upwards of $20 billion in his coffers.
Rich.
And yeah, he's up there, third longest ruling president.
You're going to get both of us kicked out of this country for all of this. But yes.
I mean, I'm just stating the facts. I mean, it's on his Wikipedia page. So if the Wikipedia page is controversial around here, I'm sorry. Yeah. But, I am a little critical of rich people that don't fund roads, especially because, second week that we were here, there was a tourist vehicle that overturned, and we drove by the location where that guy died.
Yep, there was a guy who died.
There was like 6 tourists in the vehicle. Pretty much all of them went into intensive care. One of them didn't make it. The brakes went out on a vehicle that was supposedly serviced by somebody who was unlicensed.
Yeah.
And the
roads here are just bad, right?
Probably could have used more signage, maybe a little mirror or something. But anyway, there's no money for roads. But anyway, this Honda Odyssey made us most of the way there. And we turn onto the road with the BDP sign. And we're trying to get up this trail. Like, I probably never would have even tried to get this giant vehicle up this trail. But of course, our driver, Steven, I think.
Yeah, Steven was like, fine, it's fine.
It's fine. We're just going to go. I should say something about the names here. Is they have like Ruchika names, right? And then they always have, and they always go last name first and then first name last.
When they write it.
When they write
when they write it, they write last name first, then first name. But when they speak it first name, then last name, which is weird. And a lot of the names here are either Ruchika or they're religious names, right? So they're names from the Bible. Because
I think some people just have both. They just pick like a religious name, and they have all sorts of names like blessing,
honest,
or harmony,
precious, pious, innocent, charity.
Yeah. I was doing like some user accounts at the school for the Wi-Fi that I set up. And I was looking at the names because normally in the States, what we do is we do first initial, last name, and that's your username usually.
Right.
So I set up this script to do this, and I'm like, what is with all these collisions? Why are there so many people with? And then I look at the last name column, and it's like names like Steven.
First name.
Yeah, and I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. And some people, it wasn't consistent, right? So data normalization is a problem no matter where you go. But anyway, so Steven, right, which is a crazy name because this guy's definitely like a local. He could have had any name.
Yep.
His name's Steven. And he's trying to get up this, and it reminded me of being in Minnesota when you're climbing up a hill with some ice, and it's just like the tires
spinning tires. And it
doesn't help that we got 6 people in this thing, and then when it gets loaded down with post-show, because you're talking about hundreds of kilograms of
we usually go with, let's see, we're talking 20 participants times 5, right? So 100 kilograms.
That's just post-show.
Right there, just a post-show. Yeah. Another 200 kilograms of beans.
And that's 6 butts in the seats.
6 butts. And that's only if for the participant gifts. When we go to the Batwa settlements, we also give every household 5 kilos of posho because the whole settlement comes to listen. And so sometimes we've gone with as many as like 500 kilos of posho, which is almost 1,000 pounds. It's a lot.
So the heavy Honda Odyssey was spinning tires, and we didn't make it more than like 10 feet up their driveway. I say driveway, it's obviously nothing like that, but it is about 1.5 miles up the hill to where we were going to be doing the presentation and the blood draws. And so we back down, and one of our boys, he gets on the phone and he calls the locals to come grab the stuff, grab the donations. carry it up
grab
the
all the
hill.
equipment, put it on your head, and carry it up the mile.
And somehow, within like a 5-minute span, the word must have spread because they all just came down with shovels, pickaxes, and hoes. These tools, all these heavy tools, right? And they just decide we're gonna resurface this entire area, including that tree right there,
including removing a tree.
Yeah. Yep. There was no discussion about this. There was no debating with them. They came down, they saw this vehicle that was more or less stuck in the dirt, and they were like, they're bringing food, we're taking the day off work, let's freaking go.
We literally they arrived and we were like, okay, let's open the car. And by the time we got to the car, there were guys swinging hose at this ground, and they resurfaced. It doesn't even look the same anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I helped them carry the tools back up the hill. And the house where the tools came from was not close. And the amount of time it took them to like get there, you would think that like maybe they were already halfway down with the tools, assuming we needed. No, I'm sure they weren't. They literally grabbed the tools. They must have just been running down this hill.
Yep.
And all of them were barefoot. They were swinging these giant ass pickaxes. They were swinging these
right next to their feet.
Right next to their feet.
No shoes.
None of them.
Well, in fairness,
one had shoes, but they were flip flops, open toes.
I was gonna say, had they had shoes, they would have all been flip flops. Yeah. And so, yeah, no.
But I've never seen that fast of action, right? Like I just imagine like things in the United States, you know, if you can even get on the contractor's schedule, you're like, you got inside knowledge.
But they don't even, right? But so part of it is just like sort of the lack of oversight and permanent, right? If you had to do it in the US, you'd have to get tons of permits. It would be over a year, right? Whereas here, like nobody cares about this dirt road in rural Uganda, whatever, only the people who use it.
I hope you don't need a permit to take down a tree. Maybe there'd be like a bird nest in it and you'd be like, oh no.
Well, but so this is not uncommon, right? Nancy, who you met, was telling us a story about how
Canadian Nancy.
How they were going to build a school and there was no way to get the materials up. And the whole community came together and in like 3 weeks built a road.
I was on my morning walk today and I saw this guy like literally carving a plank, old fashioned style, you know, like the images of Jesus as he's being his little carpenter.
Yep.
And he's doing that thing with
That's what they do.
They're literally making planks. The dude he was making like a floorboard or something and it looked pristine.
Yep. And have you not walked by the woodworking area where they like, I mean, and there's welders here. They've got a whole, you know, I mean, it is amazing what they can do here by hand. That like in the US, we wouldn't even, we'd be like, what? I need a machine. I need multiple machines to make this happen. Like the brick making that you've seen everywhere.
Yeah. So on my walk today, I saw the guy carving a board. I saw dudes making those bricks.
Yep.
And I saw a third group of people that were literally turning big rocks into smaller rocks.
Small rocks with hammers.
And you can hear them like, I'm listening to my podcast in one ear, but I usually keep one ear free. And I'm walking down and it's just like, beep, beep, beep,
yep.
Beep, beep. There's like 6 people and they're all sitting on this giant pile. They each have their own giant pile of rocks. They were there when I left.
Yep.
They were there when I got
back. And they're taking rocks like this big and turning them into rocks that are this big. And then they take rocks that are this big and they turn them into gravel.
Yeah. They're wild. Making gravel.
Yeah.
Like
by hand.
I did landscaping at my house in Colorado. I think I ordered like 4 tons of rock, which was like 1.5 tons more than I needed. But that's what we're talking about. Landscape rock. Yep. It looked nice. It was white rock.
It's nice rock. Yeah.
But how do we even make that in the States? We put it into like a
grinder,
hydraulic
probably.
press?
Yeah, something. Who knows?
Press. But I mean, these guys, they're freaking determined.
Well, you've been to the dental and vision clinic and seen the construction, right? Like the way that they
that makes me
put up scaffolding is insane. And you would like in the USA, you'd be like, that's never going to work. Everyone's going to die. And yet they build.
They do wear hard hats though.
They do wear hard hats. They do wear shoes, which is like a big bonus. But yeah, you walk around and you're like, oh, there's just like logs. That's what we're using to hold everything up. Logs. Cool. Okay. Roped together with some twine. Awesome. And it works. Yeah, it's wild here. But yeah, so anyway, so those guys took down the tree. We got the car halfway.
Yeah. So I don't know, man. It was kind of tough. So we got the car like 1/4 of the mile back up the hill. And man, once that car started stalling in the dirt on this steep hill, everybody got behind it and started pushing it. And I felt really bad for everybody sweating over that because I think we just hiked the rest of the way.
I know.
It wasn't the end of the world.
They wanted to help us out. They really wanted to get the vehicle up there.
But it does speak to like just how freaking nice. I don't even know. I don't have the words.
Community minded.
Words. It's just an entirely different mind.
If you get stuck here doing anything, all of a sudden people just come out of the wood. Like it's like you're like, I am stuck in the road, and suddenly 30 people are there to push your vehicle.
Yeah. Dr. Kelvin told me an interesting story last night about this. I'm telling him about the tree, and he was like, "Yeah, me and my wife were driving around. The rental car had a problem. We opened it up. We were looking at it. We pull out this serpentine belt, right? And it's the middle of the night. It's like pitch black, and he's sitting there scratching his head. He doesn't know what he's gonna do. And some people like come out of the bush, and they look at it. They take the belt from him, and they just disappear back into the bush. And he's like, "Well,
great, I just got robbed. Yep.
Like, what is happening?" And then a short time later, they come out and they have a used one.
Yep.
And they just pop it right on there, and then they go back into the bush. And I wish I could paint a picture better for you. This is all just words and a video of a conference room. But if you leave the surrounding square mile, it is rural as rural gets. There's nothing.
There's a house here, maybe a house here.
Yeah.
Maybe a house over there.
Like people in the United States might imagine like Mexico or Guatemala to be like rural or not well-to-do places, but every street corner, every street in either Mexico or Guatemala, they have shopettes. They have a wide variety of supply chains. They got this, they got that. But the grocery store here in town, and this is not a small place. We got a nursing school with 500 students. We got the hospital that sees
300 staff.
Yeah.
Several hundred patients all at a time. Yep.
A couple of weeks ago, the grocery store expanded, and now they're double the size by adding like a cubicle worth of space.
It's basically the size of a medium.
It's almost
gas
the size
station.
of this room. If you put all the freaking
I always tell people it's the size of a medium-sized gas station.
Yeah.
At home. That's how big. That's the supermarket.
Well, somebody might watch this and think Buc-ee's. Yeah.
No. That's not what I mean. No.
Buc-ee's.
I mean like a normal Shell station or a Marathon, but without the attached McDonald's or whatever, right? Like just a regular.
There's no hot dog roller thing that's keeping your food.
And what you can buy in there, and that is the supermarket. It's not just food. There's clothes. There's school supplies. There's food is like three aisles, three sets of shelves, really.
I met a guy on my walk today. I met a lot of people today.
Yeah.
It was crazy. I think it's amazing. You just go out for walks and people stop you and you talk to them. And there's this one guy, I felt bad because he's like, we met the other week. And I was like, I couldn't place him. I got his WhatsApp now. I don't know where that's going, but I guess we'll see. But he introduced me. He showed me like he was working on his farm, right? And he was showing me all his produce and looked good. And he introduced me to his wife and stuff like that. But this guy lives like a block and a half from the guest house where we're staying.
Yep.
And this guy's living conditions look pretty much identical to what was going on in the Batwa. And so you just know that, man, we are living a good freaking life here.
It is
at the guest house. Like I got a bed.
You got a whole bed.
Netting.
You've got a toilet.
There's a toilet.
There's running water.
It's hot sometimes.
There's electricity.
Sometimes there's electricity.
Yeah, it's wild. It's
I'm the guy who has to fix the internet when it goes out, but we have these things.
It's hard to explain to
and
people.
There's food.
It's hard to explain to people back home, like,
oh man,
this house that this guy is probably living in. What, the size of a queen size bed? Tops?
It's actually a pretty decent.
Was it big?
Structure.
Okay.
But the thing is, they don't have furniture or anything to put in it.
Yep.
There's floor space undoubtedly.
But when you say decent sized house, you mean
for the
400 square feet.
Yeah.
At most, right? You mean 400 square feet or smaller, right?
Yeah. It's funny, this guy's name was Emily.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, you can't always tell gender by names here.
Absolutely not.
But yeah, it is interesting. A 400 square foot house here is a big house, right? What you saw yesterday, how big were those houses?
They were pretty approximate to the physical size and proportion of the Batwa, which you're studying for being small.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're the size of, if they're as big as on the video, if they're as big as from where you and I are sitting to the wall and over. right? Like that seems that's probably about maybe a little bigger.
I did think it was interesting because, they had separate bedrooms. They had like a little wall and like a little doorway for the bedroom. Right?
Yep.
I mean, there wasn't a door on it.
Nope.
There wasn't a sheet. But I mean, there was definitely division between the rooms. Like somebody sleeps over there,
Yep.
we sleep over here.
Yep.
It's not like they're looking at each other. I think you look at the Pioneer Day cabin designs where it's just like
one room,
one bed, one fireplace.
Yep. Nope.
No, they actually did put some effort into separating out rooms. So it's like it's small, but there's no sitting room. There's
I guess what I mean is like it's hard to describe to people back home. Like when I say small, and at home you might think like a 600 square foot studio apartment, right? And a 600 square foot studio apartment here would be like the lap of luxury, right? And so it's interesting to talk about like poverty levels here, right? We're talking about food and $10 being 3 days' wages, right? Like, which is just wild.
I will say, right, so I've traveled extensively in South America and Central America. I say extensively. I know people who are going to watch this who have just lived there for years, and I am an amateur by all accounts. But from what I have seen, the level of poverty here is on a very different level.
It is. If you go to rural places,
there's rural Guatemala, which can be rough.
Which can be.
This feels very different to me, though.
This feels different. I will also say that your poverty here looks different than poverty elsewhere, right? So here, people don't tend to put their money into buying a big house. What they instead do is sponsor like 5 kids to go to school. Right. So school here is not free. It's anywhere from like $100 a month or a year or a semester to like $500 a semester. And like
private school.
Yeah. Everyone you talk to, though, is often they're supporting their kids, but they're also supporting like their sister's kids or their neighbor's kids or whatever. Right. And so like one of my collaborators, Haven, is supporting 8 kids right now. He has 2. Right. And so that for him is approximately $1,000 a year. And so he's using that instead of.
I got some numbers for this. The average surgeon here makes like $900 a month. At this hospital.
Okay.
And then nurses, they make somewhere around the $120 to $150 range per month. And I think like the average like field labor must be clocking in at like $20 or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
$20-$30 a month. 40 maybe.
Because I think like the average per capita like yearly income is, if all of Uganda is somewhere like, God, one of the boys told me about it. I wanted to say $500, but does that seem low?
That's low. That's low per year.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. If you're talking $40 a month, most people here are farm laborers.
Yeah.
Right?
I would, just per capita.
Yeah.
There are some like super high income people that own and run, people who need their palms greased.
Yeah.
Get greased. The squeaky wheels get greased around here, a lot of it.
But it's where the money goes, right? Like, or people will own land elsewhere. They spend a lot of time traveling to visit family, right? And so, and they're just, and they're not particularly worried, like in the US, right? We are like, we have to save for retirement, right? They don't worry about that here. They have kids. The kids will take care of them. Right? Like there's no social security, right? Or like any of those things, right? And in fairness, things here are not nearly as expensive. If you want to rent a room here, we are paying like $30 a night for a room.
For me, that's insane. $900 a month
for here,
3 meals a day.
For here,
with a staff that takes care of everything you need.
$50 would get you like I think they said for $50 to $100 a night or $100 a month, 2-bedroom house. Yeah.
Dang.
So
I'm getting ripped off? No.
I
don't feel like it.
Yeah. So no cook though, right?
Right.
But
and also no supply chains, because if you're buying all your food, so the way our guest house gets food is they tapped into the local resort supply chains.
Yeah.
So on their way to the resorts where the people pay $1,500 a night for basically the same kind of experience that we have, where they get their 3 meals a day. They get unlimited alcohol though.
Their food is different. Their food is much nicer.
It comes from the same base materials.
You're correct. But it is still much fancier.
I'm sure it is. But we get the food off those trucks.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So if you were to rent a house, you would be forced to use, the public supply chains. which Saturdays they do the market here, and I posted some of this on my Instagram story, but it's like vegetables rolling around on the ground.
Yep.
Cows being hacked up with the same machete they used to slice through the jungle that day.
Yep. And in front of you to be hung on a hook.
Yeah.
For a few days as we sell off parts of it.
I get the impression that everybody here slaughters animals. Like that's like normal. That's like everybody knows how to slaughter animals. And it's the same thing in so many other aspects of life too. Like if you're gonna have a birth, a place like this is very uncommon in Uganda where they do 3 births a night. But before this place existed, like
home birth.
15 years ago, this place is brand spanking new. It looks like it's been weathered and aged. Like that's what I told Scott.
The sun.
I told Scott that last night. I was like, "Hey man, when did you make this place?" Because this looks like it's from the 60s or something. And it's literally 20 years.
Yep.
Brand spanking new.
Brand new.
This looks like a government building from the 80s. But I don't know how they did it. He told me they didn't use rainforest concrete. I don't feel like that's the only reason. I think this place gets a lot of use.
Well, and also a lot of sun, a lot of rain. Right during the rainy season, it rains every day, pretty monsoony for a couple of months.
I don't even know what that's like because we're here during the dry season.
Yeah.
I like the rain, but maybe monsoon season doesn't sound fun.
The problem with monsoon season is, as you said, the roads are bad and they turn into mud pits, and it's actually really difficult. There's one stretch of the road. Do you know where Kanishande is?
Boy, no, I do not.
Okay, when we go out the next time, if you come out next week, I'll show it to you. It's where there's a turnoff. There's a hill, like a reasonably steep hill with a lot of potholes in it. And in the rainy season, apparently that turns into a whole mud pit, and it's almost impossible to get out of Bwindi. Like almost
impossible to leave this place at all?
Like quite difficult to get out.
You can't even get to Kigali?
Yep.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So, rainy season's on its way. That's why you bought your ticket for soon.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. I didn't realize that was a risk factor.
Yep. I mean, you can get out, right? Yeah. It won't rain every day, and it won't be that bad. But, under my understanding is that they stopped doing community outreach or field work because it's just too difficult to get anywhere.
Even on the bodabodas. So the bodabodas are the motorcycles, by the way.
Who never wear helmets, and most of them don't have mirrors and, brakes.
Yeah. To be honest, they don't even hardly use the engines from what I gather. Like, I think they just turn the engines off as soon as the downhill starts, the engine is just off.
Yep, and they just roll.
Yep. Because I haven't even heard anybody throttling those things. And they're always like, come, get a ride. And I'm like, dude, I am triple your size. I'm about the weight of your bike.
But
I know they can do it.
4 people on that bike.
I know they can do it.
100 kilos of posho. So I promise you'd be fine.
If I'm not the one controlling the handlebars, I don't want nothing to do with it.
I wouldn't ride on them either.
I've had to be on the back of my buddy George's bike. Shout out to George. I'm sure you're listening. But I've had to be on his bike a couple of times, and he's probably the only person I would want to be on.
If you're gonna ride a bodaboda, do it in Rwanda.
Yeah.
They
got roads?
They have roads.
What?
One, I know. They have paved roads.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It's crazy. I haven't experienced ice in 6 weeks, at least. I haven't experienced paved roads in that same amount of time.
So
I haven't seen anything other than goat. No,
they have paved roads, and they actually have their bodaboda drivers are registered. They all have to have mirrors and helmets. It's wild. Whereas here,
one less citizen. I don't know if they mind.
Yeah.
It's 40% of people, maybe it's 38% are below the age of 15 in Uganda.
That's pretty typical for most African countries, though, right?
And it's pretty obvious when you're just walking around that that's the case, because kids are everywhere.
Children are everywhere, except not right now because they're all in school. But
there's still a lot of
kids. There's still a lot
of, but when we first got here, it was kids.
Children everywhere.
And they love the Mzungu.
They do. They're so cute. And particularly when we used to go to the settlements and the kids are there, the kids love to just stand and stare and watch as you process everything.
I think I scare them. On my walks in the mornings, I've been going further and further away from the center of town. I say center of town very, very
the main
closely.
Road. That's really what you mean.
The road that you would use to leave here.
The main road, because the rest of it is walking trails.
Yeah. So I've been going out into the woods and just because it's crazy. There's goat paths and there are people always walking goats and cows. So there's little itty bitty trails that go up into all of these hills. I've had a great time just going up there because, if you're in Colorado or something, you might have a trail, but it's primarily tread by humans to go to point A or point B. They have just trails here. They don't go anywhere. They're just taking a trail so that their goats can eat grass.
Yeah.
So there's like trails every inch of this place.
Yeah.
And they're all pretty well.
They're hard to find. You sort of have to be the person exploring, though, to see them, right? Because, it's not like...
Well, it's not a tourist experience.
Yeah.
It's like I need some exercise. I want to go see some trees. But it's crazy how the ecology changes. I think this is a pretty high elevation location, right?
Yeah, reasonably.
All the native Ugandans that come here to the hospital, they're always complaining about how cold it is.
It's so cold here.
Oh,
so cold. To be clear,
they're talking about how it takes weeks to adjust to the temperature.
At most, it goes down to like 68 for us, right? Yeah. Like at most. And every Ugandan here every morning has got a hat on and a jacket and maybe a sweater, and they're like so cold, and you're like, it is what? It's like 75.
It's crazy seeing people on the motorcycles too, because they are bundled up.
Now, in fairness, that I understand.
Yeah.
Because that's a couple reasons, right? Because
dress for the slide, not the ride.
For the dirt and gravel that gets kicked up by the trucks and the other bodas and stuff, right? You get hit.
Wear a helmet, bro. Come on.
You get hit pretty hard with that kind of stuff.
Right. I didn't think about that, I guess, but
they wear layers in order to preserve their skin so that they don't get like shredded by like gravel.
Yeah, my allergies have been coming back just because the amount of dust that's on the road.
The dust is really bad right now.
We walked to the local bar for a lunch out. And we took like an extra mile just to stay out of the dust clouds.
The dust is so bad.
It was worth it.
The dust is so bad. You come back every day and like below from the knee down is just like red with the red dirt.
Well, yeah, you can see it on my sandals, and it like gets ingrained into my feet.
Yep.
It's on my shoes. It's everywhere.
Yep. That's one of the reasons why often when you like come here, like I brought 4 pairs of shoes and I'm going to leave 3 of them here.
They're ruined.
Because I mean, they're not ruined. Like I've taken shoes back before. But like why? Right? It takes forever to clean them. And so you just wear old shoes here and then you leave them for people who don't have shoes.
So how many times have you been here?
3 times here.
Yeah, you're an amateur compared to some of these.
I am basically an amateur.
There are people that have been here 10, 20 times, stayed for weeks.
Years, even a year. Yeah, Julia lived here for a year. Like, yeah.
Dr. Katie Grogan, welcome back.
Thanks, Matthew. So excited to be back.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties. So we did like an hour and 15-minute session. And then I realized when I went into post-production that there was no audio. So this is definitely something I'm still working out the kinks on. Every setting can be a little bit different. But hopefully this will be the wrap-up. All right.
It's amazing. On your 3rd episode, you haven't figured everything out yet?
Well, I have fat fingers, and sometimes I push the wrong buttons, and look at that. The audio never recorded in the first place. So it was a whole pain. So we did change clothes. It's been a couple of days, but we're going to pick up.
And showered, just to be clear.
Oh, yes. We got hot water galore. My room for the last couple of days has had one of the shocker shower types where the water gets pumped directly from the pipe into this little machine that heats up the water right there and then.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. But it was the most sophisticated one I've ever seen. So I've seen plenty in Mexico, Guatemala, Colombia, whatever. Mm-hmm. But inevitably there's always like some exposed wires. And if you like try and fiddle with like the water flow or you try to change the shower head settings, it'll send a shock right down through your body.
That's awful.
Yeah, but that's what we call them, the shocker showers.
Okay.
They're classy. I like, but you know what? It's warm water, and I have tried taking cold water showers, and man, it makes me feel like a little sissy for sure.
That is one of the benefits of being here, right? Is like, particularly staying in the guest house, is they know that Westerners are coming and that we're kind of babies and that we really like our hot showers. And so they are very good at making sure there's always hot water. Right.
You say that, but so Xander and I, we were staying in a different building down the road, and it has a more conventional water heater, right? Mm-hmm. And it's funny because first time we get there, the water heater was working great, almost too good, because
it gets really hot.
The water was basically boiling.
Yep.
And if you turned up the cold water at all, it immediately went to like freezing cold. And I don't know if that was like a water pressure issue or something.
Interesting.
So Xander went in first and he did his shower and it took him a while. I didn't really think anything of it.
As he's in there messing and you're like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I didn't even pay any attention. And then Xander comes out and then I go in and it takes me 15 minutes. I don't know how long he spent figuring like how to get the water to the right temperature, but yeah, it was funny.
Yeah, it's not the normal problem that people have is the water heater is because the buildings we're in, right, have 2 rooms. And the water heater covers both of them.
Yep, 2 showers.
But they turn off the hot water heater to save electricity.
Right.
And the switch is on the outside of one of the rooms. And so many people in the second room don't know that in order to take a shower, they need to go over and turn the hot water heater on like 20 minutes early.
Yeah, at least 20 minutes early.
Yeah.
And I think we went 3 or 4 days with cold water over there, and we were a little bit suffering. I mean, it's cold water. We can survive. It's not the end of the world. But
it's just unpleasant.
Yeah, but when the water heater switch is like 7.5 feet in the air, I saw it, thankfully. At some point, I saw a big old label, says water heater, and I'm like, because, you're in Uganda and you're like, oh, hot water is just out,
Well,
whatever.
because you just assume, right, because the electricity, it's funny because this time the electricity has been much more on-off than it has in past trips that I've been here, where the electricity has been a little bit more stable.
Right.
Like, weirdly, and I don't know if it's because you're here, but the Wi-Fi has been more stable and the electricity less stable this time.
Yeah.
But the last time I was here, the electricity was pretty stable, but the Wi-Fi was like in and out all the time. And so, when the hot water goes off, you just are sort of like, well, the electricity, right? Like
that's what we thought.
Right, just the electricity.
But then the lights come on and you're like, well, where are they controlling it from? Turns out the switch was right there and could have hit it. Right. But eventually I did find it. And I don't know if the guys ever appreciate my troubleshooting skills, but I brought hot water back to the people.
Well, it's interesting because before the water heaters, or in a lot of places, they have the big, giant black tanks that are full of water that they lift up and the sun heats them. And so some mornings it's tight, it's hard to get, you can get kind of a lukewarm shower, but like in the evenings, you can get basically boiling hot water just from those tanks.
Jeez. Well, it does get that hot here. I look at my phone every day and it says, oh, it's 84 degrees, and then, I don't feel like it's that hot. I mean, if you're out there working, you're going to build
in the sun,
sweat.
It's pretty boiling, right?
Yeah.
In the sun, it's hot, and it's very humid here.
I think I've acclimated between being in Guatemala before this and now I'm in Africa, and I've been here 7 weeks now.
Yep.
Yeah, but I've been acclimating. It's funny. Anyway, that's the hot water situation.
That's right.
But we left off, I think you said that you'd been here 3 times before.
Yeah, I was here in Buhoma specifically for a week in 2019 because I was a postdoctoral fellow and I was working in the lab of a guy named PJ Perry who had done research here previously and had been investigating the genomic basis of the Batwa's short stature, right? So there's a lot of theories about why they're short-statured. The first one was that basically they didn't get enough nutrition. Right. And that they're just short because they weren't eating well as children, and if they had had a much better diet, they'd all be as tall as you, well, me, not you.
I think that's the usual assumption because that's usually what happens in people.
Right, right. Except it's not.
Not true here.
Not at all. And so the Batwa there's a genomic basis to their short stature. You can literally graph like amount of Batwa ancestry by height, and it's a linear relationship. Oh. So the more Batwa ancestry you have, the shorter you are.
Wow.
Yes. And so we know it's genomic, and now we have the second generation, right? And they've been eating plenty. And yes, they are the younger Batwa are a little taller, but they're not tall, right? Right. They're like my height.
Nutrition made an impact, but perhaps not as much as what the difference we're talking about. I think in one of our in the video where We didn't get any audio. I'll probably
but you
clip
have to
in.
include that piece.
Yeah, because it was this little Batwa lady.
One of the nurses
and then
here.
You.
Yep.
And then me.
Yep.
And it was like, oh boy.
Yeah, there's 2 nurses here who are from the Batwa community, and I think her name is Joven, and she is like 4 foot tall, basically.
Straight up.
Right? She is basically 4 foot tall.
Right.
And I mean, she's younger, so I don't know if, where she was born in terms of what her nutritional status was or how short her parents were, but like, no, it's
even
genetic.
If she was eating like
even if she was
steak
eating
and potatoes every day, she wasn't going to get to be.
No, she was never going to be. Even 4'5", I'd give it.
Yeah.
But so anyway, they had done all this work, and one of the things that happens in genetics research a lot is that people participate. You're a scientist, you ask them to participate, they participate, and then they never hear anything about what happens with the study, right? So we publish it, but like, who has time to go read a scientific paper? Even if you were part of it, no. So, and that's one of the complaints the Batwa have a lot, is that a lot of people have come and asked them to participate in research, and they never come back and tell them what they found. And so PJ is pretty good about making sure, so he had been back, this was his 2nd trip back, just to tell everyone what we had found. And so we were giving presentations at several of the settlements, not the one you went to, but we went to Chitario and I think Bikuto and one other place. And PJ just sort of, we introduced ourselves, we talked about the research, and then myself and another postdoc, Christina, talked about what we might like to do in the future, and they invited us back. And then I finished that job, became a professor at University of Cincinnati, and then COVID happened, and so then I couldn't come back for a couple of years.
Yeah, because you started this effort for the current research project in 2019.
We introduced it in 2019. I officially started it as like my own research project when I got hired at Cincinnati, but that was August of 2020, which was like a really great time to start scientific research that depends on international travel.
Yeah.
And move to a new state. It was just like a great time. So that didn't, from 2020 to basically spring 2022, there was an international travel ban at almost all universities. I managed to get an exception, and we did come here in summer 2022 to basically talk to people at the hospital, talk to my collaborators, Sylvia and Haven. Haven's at the hospital. Haven is a community, he's part of the community health department. He does a lot of research here. He facilitates a lot of research. And then Sylvia is my collaborator, who is a Mutwa individual, right? She started the nonprofit Action for Batwa Empowerment Group. And so I was here meeting with them and meeting with the Batwa Development Program. And then we went out to multiple, like 8 settlements or something like that, and talked to everyone and basically said, okay, we're back. We're definitely doing this project. Here's the premise. Are you interested? And they asked us if we could start tomorrow. And I was like, well, no.
So you were just laying the groundwork at that
Laying
point.
the groundwork. I mean, because, if they're not interested in participating.
Because it's taking blood. Taking blood is definitely scary for them.
It's definitely a problem.
Is that common, though?
I mean, scary, I don't know. When PJ was here and taking blood, we took 5 to 8 mils. PJ took 50 mils.
Oh.
Which is a lot.
Why do you need that much?
He was making immortalized cell lines, and you have to isolate the lymphocytes, basically. And so you need enough lymphocytes to immortalize cell lines. But 50 mils of blood is like at least, right? Like, it's a lot.
Well, at that rate, I mean, the Batwa are like these very small people. I mean, that's a big chunk of blood.
It was not a small amount. It's not actually this much. This is a liter, right? So this is 100. So
man.
It's half of this. But it was still a blood bag, basically.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, they all, he got 100 participants. We've gotten almost 400. We've gotten 330 at this point. Jeez. So they're not really afraid. They just get frustrated that nobody comes to talk to them first and ask them, like, what if we did this study? What are your concerns? What are you worried about, right? And they had some valid concerns, and that's one of the things we talked about. They were concerned that they would be identified as not Batwa.
Right.
They were concerned, you saw them, they were concerned that you're going to be selling their blood, all these kinds of things. And so you spend a lot of time reassuring them and making sure that they understand like what the purpose and what we will do with it and what we won't do.
So you're going to come back in the future and actually tell them what the research resulted in. So what do you think are going to be the interesting points for them? What are they going to want to know?
Ooh, I mean, what they probably are gonna want to know are things that they already know. So like, you sort of saw, like when you ask them what is leaving the forest done to you, they know. We are weaker. We have a lot more diseases. We because we aren't eating the same foods we were eating before. We don't have access to our traditional medicine. Our children are weaker. You know, our children get sick much more frequently, which their kids are going to school, right? Yeah. That's why they get sick more frequently.
Little petri dishes.
Exactly, right? Children are licking each other and stuff, and so, you know, no. But the kids get sick a lot more. The adults do too, in theory, but part of that, you know, is that because they're contacting tons of other people where previously they wouldn't have been? Or is it just because they're not, you know, it's been a long time, it's taken them a long time to get to the place where they're eating good food on a regular basis in enough quantities, right? And spending a decade in near starvation levels is going to mess with your whole body. So, yeah, I think they're going to tell us that. I mean, I am interested. One of the things that happens with trauma is in genetics, in genomic circles, epigenomic circles, is your epigenome actually can make you appear older than you chronologically are.
I think we mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
I think it's remarkable that if you look at pictures from like the 1920s, right? They had these black and white cameras. You know, they were going around taking pictures of things that they, you know, weren't normally taking pictures of. It's not just for the kings and the rich people. It's people would go out and do photography amongst like the common people, and that was during the Great Depression era.
Yep, and everybody looks awful.
Yeah, they're like 15, 16. They could easily pass for like 25, 30.
Yep.
It seems.
So
but is that reflected in the genome then?
Yeah, it's reflected in the epigenome. So basically, epigenome, in particular, this epigenomic mechanism called methylation patterns. Basically, methylation patterns is putting a methyl group, it's not that important, onto your DNA, onto a nucleotide. And the more of them you have, the less a gene in that area is expressed, basically.
So that's how you measure the epigenome then.
That's one of the ways.
Okay.
And so, but you can actually, particularly with Westerners, you can measure methylation patterns at like 400 sites in the genome, and it will predict your chronological age. Right? So
predict it or
it will basically
measure it.
Yeah, it will. Well, no. So your chronological age is 30, right?
Oh yes, yeah.
So we could, if we didn't know that, we could take your methylation patterns, put it into this website that does this, and onto this program, and it will spit out. Matthew is somewhere between 28 and 32.
I think ideally, I think I'm getting way more gray hairs than I should.
It might actually spit out. So this is interesting. It might actually spit out. Matthew is close to 40.
Right.
Which would say that your biological age is much older than your chronological age.
If that were the case, you know, and life expectancy is 72 or whatever, would I realistically die at 62 then? If I was 10 years off of...
No, that's not to say that you would die, but it might say you're likely to be unhealthier compared to other people of your same chronological age later on.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like, so chronological age...
I already feel it, so yeah.
Versus biological age is one of the ways we explain how, like, someone who is 60, like, right, you take 10 60-year-olds into a room, and some of them are, or let's go with Dr. Scott, 10 80-year-olds, right? One is Dr. Scott, who is still coming to Uganda all the time, crazy active, etc.
He's got a backpack. He's carrying it everywhere.
Exactly.
And then there's also Dieter. You can't even guess how old that guy is. He's a German anesthesiologist that spends like a quarter of the year here. The guy's jacked, and he's definitely late 60s.
At least. Yeah. Then you line him up against, you know, say my parents, who are in their 70s. And they are basically, compared to Dr. Scott and Dieter, are basically like in a wheelchair.
So what you're saying is age is just a number, huh?
Chronological age is just a number. Biological age is how healthy you're going to be.
Right. Exactly.
So one of the things we're interested in is, my guess is that the Batwa will appear biologically older than they are chronologically. Both the older generation and the younger generation, potentially, because they're growing up outside the forest where their bodies are adapted to the forest. But that's one of the places. Another thing that we are interested in looking at is we have some evidence that there has been selection on Batwa cardiac function. This is work done by a friend of mine. Basically, and the premise of that, we were really surprised by that. Like I remember her coming to us with those results and being like, that's weird. What do you mean heart function? Why? Turns out, for Westerners, the shorter you are, the more likely you are to die of heart disease.
Does that make any sense, though? I mean, more blood vessels to circulate blood around, you'd think maybe the big people would have trouble with heart problems.
You have trouble with other things. Don't worry.
Oh, wow, yeah.
But short people are more likely to die of heart disease. So the idea with the Batwa, and this is our sort of hand-wavy explanation, is that because they are so short, possibly there was compensatory selection to keep their hearts healthy, right? Because they are so short.
Compensatory selection.
Meaning that if they were of, say, you were in my ancestry, their chances of heart disease would be really, really, really high. And so in order for them, basically, as the forest selected them to be smaller, it also selected them to have better heart health for their heart, for their size.
So could this be applicable to anything in like a wider worldwide?
Unclear. I don't know. That's just basically scanning their genomes. So now the goal is to take a look at the genes that are involved in heart function. Are they being expressed differently than, say, the Bachiga or, say, Westerners?
Right.
Is there something happening there? And then actually, my actual goal eventually is to come back here and work with the hospital to look through the health records and see, do the Batwa experience less heart disease than we would expect? And my guess is they probably will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know they're keeping good records in there.
They keep really, really good records here. Yeah.
And those records are actually being backed up at the Capitol as well.
Yes.
So even if something did happen here, I think they would still have them.
Yep.
But, data loss and, data retention is always going to be a thing. And then data privacy is also a big deal. So
we would come back and ask for their permission to dig into the medical records and all of those things. The plan is to come back here basically every year.
So that's the future then?
That's the future.
Every year you want to come back?
I'd like to come back every year-ish, year to every other year.
How could you say no?
Exactly. Well, in fairness, I will say, right, it's going to depend on grant funding and all those kind of things, but that's one of the reasons why the rest of my team is all Ugandan, right? So that if I can't make it back here, this project doesn't become one of those projects where the Batwa are like, you came, you took blood, and then we never heard from you again, right?
Well, these people live here, right?
They live here.
They'll see Mr. Cooley again.
So they'll see Mr. Cooley, they'll see Haven, they'll see Sylvia, and worst case scenario, I will be paying them to go out to the different settlements and explain to them what we have found. It'll probably be a couple of years, which is a little hard to explain.
A couple of years? They're going to be forgetting.
Welcome to
You're going to need to send a picture of yourself.
No, they remember me. They remember me. Because the first time I came here, the first and second time I came here, I did, when I was doing our community discussion, if you remember, during the community discussion, I talked about how skin color is different, right?
Right.
And how you and I are very white-skinned.
Okay,
And that's, right? And
Absolutely.
how environment changed. Our ancestors came from Africa. They used to have dark skin. They moved to Europe, lost that dark pigmentation. Now we have light skin. But environment changes you in shorter times, i.e. the tanning that you and I are happening, right?
Is this epigenome that's being re-expressed?
Not really.
Probably not.
But basically, before I had a really good tan the second time I came here, and so I moved my watch and showed them, like, this is what my real skin color looks like, and this is what the environment is doing here. They remember me. Like, I've come back and Sylvia was explaining, like, no, she's the one who did this. And they were like, oh, yeah, your hair's different. I was like, yes, it is. So, yeah, the goal is to come back. The goal is to, I have probably got about 10 years of research ideas here. So, but yes, it will take
10 years of research ideas.
It will take a couple of years. Research is slow. Getting federal funding takes at least 6 to 10 months. Extracting all the samples will take a couple of weeks. Sequencing them will take a few months, and running the data. Yeah, so minimally a year, probably closer to 2.
Yeah.
But yeah, the goal is to come back.
Yeah, I want to come back too, probably just to help out around the hospital. I did say I bought tickets for Tanzania, but I'm definitely not going to make it for those.
He was originally supposed to leave like after 3 weeks.
Yeah. So I have this problem, right, where I buy plane tickets and then I just don't get on the planes. So I usually don't even bother buying the tickets in the first place until it's like the last 48 hours.
Wait, you just don't show up?
Well, I mean, you can't get a refund most of the time. Kenya Airways doesn't have a refund policy. So I suppose I could spend the $50 and change them to a different day. So I'll probably do that.
Yeah.
But then, you know, I'm stuck in this loop where I'm buying another $50 to move it to a different day after that. So that's just kind of how I travel. I hate having like this hard date where it's like, oh, you gotta go.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
So I'm moving down the road to a cabin in the jungle. You know, it's about, I think it's as close as you can get to the wildlife preserve.
Yeah.
While not being at a resort.
Right.
Essentially, they have resorts somehow. I don't know if you know how this works, but they have resorts in the preserve itself. And we went there the other day with Dr. Kellerman to meet the tourists.
Yeah.
Drive up some revenue, hopefully. And you know, that's how he operates. You know, he'll spend his days. This guy works like morning to night.
All the time.
His phone's constantly blowing up. Somebody from the United States is calling him. Somebody here is calling him. And it was kind of funny, you know. He gave me this little tasker to go do some investigation at the hospital for something. And then, you know, I saw him later that day, and we were just chatting, having some coffee, chatting about, you know, personal stuff or whatever. And I'm like, but I also figured out this about what you asked me to do. And he locked in like immediately. He was just like, he shifted gears visibly. He like sits up a little bit. Yep. He like scoots closer, and he's like, all right, tell me what you found out. Yeah. So that guy's just always working. But, you know, he'll do all that, and then he'll go to the lodge. He'll buy his beer. He knows like all the people. Yep. And he speaks Ruchiga.
Yeah, he does.
You know, I can tell he's carrying his accent with him, but
yeah,
you know, people know him, and yeah, I was the friend that I was walking with today at the local. He was like, yeah, everybody knows Dr. Kellerman.
Oh, everybody knows him.
Everybody knows him.
Yeah, in fairness, I mean, he spends 6 months out of the year every year here, and he has for 20 years, right? Yeah. At least. So.
But it's funny because I feel like people still don't trust the doctors, because my friend, right, Emmy is his name. He was telling me about his mother, who has like this giant growth under her chin. It's like a grapefruit or something. And she has like a lot of pain related to it. And I'm not a doctor. I don't know what it could possibly be. And I'm like, has she gone to the hospital? And he's like, no, we're worried about the cost. And I'm like, don't be worried about the cost. There's tons of people that come here and they get $4 a month insurance. And that's how they treat people.
But the insurance covers... My understanding, and I could be wrong, you might know more about this. My understanding was the insurance covers routine care, not big surgeries, etc. Right? And I don't know how much they would charge for something like that.
Like a growth removal.
Yeah, but I mean,
even just getting an assessment of, hey, this is how much it would cost. This is, you know, the threat to life. Because I've seen other people with giant, like, they're just circular growths that are just huge.
Yep.
I saw like a little kid, you know, this isn't reserved for just old people, but he had like a growth coming out of his stomach that looked kind of like a papaya or something. Yep. And I was really confused what I was looking at in the brief second. It was kind of like I did a double take. But it seems like the same kind of thing. I don't know what it is, so I'll have to educate myself on what's going on. But it's like, Emily was telling me about when his wife gave birth, and it cost him $35 at the hospital. And he's like, that's a lot of money. And I'm like, well, maybe your mom's surgery will be less than $35. And even if it's like 50% more than that, what, $60?
Yeah.
Right. I'll sign that check. No big deal, man. Like, let's make sure your mom lives an extra 5 years. Let's not worry about $60. But that's literally the situation, because people, you know, like in your research, right, you're going to take these blood samples, but people don't want a health assessment because they don't necessarily want to know if they have HIV. Which is much more.
The men never want to know.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem being, right, that $35 is, for many people, is a month's wages.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so, like, that, you know, $35 doesn't sound like a lot to us, but it's a lot to them. And so.
But I hope Emmy gets his mom into the hospital, because I told him, right, like, I know you, I know Dr. Kellerman. You know, between the two of us, we'll figure it out. You know, your mom doesn't have to deal. Like, she can't look at her feet. Like, I kind of got a glance at her as I was leaving today. And it's like, oh, boy, that looks scary.
I mean, there are a lot of people here who basically go without health care. The other thing they could do, right, is wait until there's one of the surgical camps and see if somebody will do the surgery for free.
So there was a surgeon that was coming through here, a pediatric surgeon, and he was getting really upset because I've been staying in the guest house proper the last couple of days, and I could hear him having a very loud discussion with some people from the hospital, and late in the night.
Was this Seth?
Yeah.
Oh.
And he was upset because people were, so pediatric surgeon, I'm not like an expert on this stuff, but apparently they work with bones.
He's an orthopedic.
Orthopedic
surgeon, and
right.
so he does. Yes. Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. People are waiting to see him in the camps, right? So you get a fracture.
Yeah.
You get like some stage whatever fracture, and then you're like, well, we can't go to the hospital and get treated because it costs money, so we're just going to wait until Mzungu doctor shows up.
Comes and does it for free.
And then does it for free. Yeah. And now you're dealing with fractures that are halfway healed, and now you're in a spot where you can't even use the proper techniques and tools.
Yeah, him and Dieter were really mad about several of those. There had been several like dislocated legs.
And that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, yeah, I mean, you can wait for a camp, but when you have a growth, it's larger than a grapefruit, slightly smaller than a cantaloupe on this woman's neck, and it's like, just go and figure out how much it costs.
Yeah.
Once we have a number, we can fix this. You know? There's a lot of people around that need help.
Yeah.
But, you know, if we have to start a line and we have to start doing prioritizations and, you know, make sure people don't die or suffer unnecessarily. I mean, this place runs at a loss, 75% loss.
It runs at a huge
yeah,
loss.
So, I mean, one more person added to that loss to turn the 75% loss into a 75.001% loss. Let's save a life, guys.
I mean, I think it comes down to, you know, we are thinking about this place as having the backing of the Kellerman Foundation and, you know, operating at a loss and all those things. I had asked Scott actually about this because I was asking him sort of about like what it would cost to provide healthcare services for the poor here. The problem is, how do you define what is poor here? Because it's basically everybody, right? And he basically was like, it would cost $20 million. You know, it would cost just an obscene amount of money to cover medical services for everyone. And basically saying that like big donors, people who are going to write a check for $1 million, want to do a thing like build the nursing school or the dental and eye vision, right? They don't want to just like cover everyone's healthcare costs for a year. And so that he and the hospital have really been struggling about like how to cover people like Emmy's mom or, you know, other people who like the little boy with the foot, right? Like how to cover that, because at a certain point everybody here is needy and like covering everyone's healthcare would be impossible.
Right. So I do think maybe we talked about this last time, but then we lost the audio. But yeah, Lazarus was a little boy that was coming in and he had a birth defect. And Jan, one of the ladies that stays at the place, she, you know, did a video of him and started telling his story around the guest house, around the hospital. And yeah, everybody pitched in to get Lazarus a little prosthetic. He's like a little 4-year-old. He's got this cute little waddle that he does.
Oh my God, he's so cute and so smart. And yeah, so a group that was here with the Rotary Club saw him at a school, ended up came back, talked to everybody about him. Jan was here. She's a physical therapist. She was like, we have to do something now. We sent Barnabas, who's the communications manager here. He went back out to the school, got the kid and his mom and his sibling. I don't think any of us ever figured out if that little baby was a boy or a girl. Brought them to the guest house. They were here for a few days. We sent them to Kampala to a pediatric prosthetist who's going to sculpt him a limb.
But, you know, Dr. Kellerman, right, he sees Lazarus, you know, as just kind of just a one-off. Now he's looking at putting together, like, maybe like an on-site or a visiting prostheticist, I think he said.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so,
okay.
And he's like, yeah, we'll get this funded in 6 months to a year, and we'll just expand our practice to include people who need prosthetics. And he was just like washing his hands of it. He was just like, yep, this is Lazarus is just a one-time thing, but we're gonna fix this like systemically.
Awesome.
And that's why you gotta love Dr. Kellerman, right? Is like he thinks big picture. Like he
He can talk to you about any tropical disease. He can talk to you about any field of medicine. But also at the same time, he's talking to me about how much electrical cables do we need in the new IT room, how much like air conditioning, you know, the steps needed, the downtime needed to actually like put some boots on the ground and actually move some stuff. So, and he doesn't miss a beat, you know. This is all just in his brain and it's all fitting together.
It is very interesting to him because...
And then the finance piece for him is just like, oh yeah, we'll find some Mzungu to fund this.
It's interesting because like Jan is saying like, we need to get this little boy and this little girl, they need to get prosthetics like ASAP, right? Not wait till next year, not wait, you know. And we all are sort of, because there's a child in front of us, right? It's like, oh, collect money and send the child to Kampala. And Scott instead is like
$450 for this kid to get a new prosthetic. And I feel like that's, for me, it's like, it's a lot cheaper to do things here, and a little bit of money can actually help like a lot of people. If you were to like see a kid in the United States that needed a prosthetic,
Jan says $5,000.
Yeah, $5,000. I mean, that becomes a lot more difficult to fundraise, perhaps. You're not going to be selling door-to-door pizzas.
I mean, the interesting thing, right, is Scott Kellerman is like, how do we make sure he's not thinking about Lazarus or the little girl who also was sick, right? He's thinking, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again to any other kids, that from now on they can come here, get a prosthetic and leave, right, without having to go to Kampala or something like that. And I will say that is, you know, a big difference, right? But because he tends to think more, how do we make this service available to everyone as opposed to just this one person? But I still think, I mean, Lazarus's mom, they were doing the math, and Lazarus's mom makes $1.25 a day.
Right.
It doesn't matter how cheap it would be for her to come here and get it. She still couldn't have afforded it, right? So we took up a collection. And I had sent a video of him, because the other thing that was really cool, you should ask Matthew to put it on this podcast, was he learned how to ride a bike.
I wish I had the video of that, actually.
I have video of it. It is the cutest thing. The guest house manager's wife and guest house manager, Rachel, they had a pedal-less bike for their kid, Sayuni, when she was little, right? And so we put Lazarus on it, like Lazarus got on it, and Rachel held the bike up and rode him around, and his face was so adorable.
Well, now he's going to be able to ride a bike. You know?
And so he's going to be able to ride a bike.
Yeah, he's gonna be able to, maybe not run per se, but he'll be able to
I'll bet he will
walk.
be able to. I'll bet he'll be able to run. He was pretty mobile for a kid who was missing half of a limb.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a lot of steps up to the guest house, and he was conquering those steps with basically no foot. He just had like a knee and then a chart of bone.
Yep.
And he was walking on it like it was a peg leg almost.
It was really cute. Yeah.
But yeah, we can't talk necessarily forever, because 2 hours was the goal, and I'm sure we're going to go over a little bit. But you're doing some really great research out here. Thank you for letting me participate in my small little way, as I'm not necessarily like a tourist or like a documenter or anything.
It was great having you. It was so much fun. It was, and I mean,
a little change of face, you know?
Well, and the thing that's fun about having you come with us, right, is that like, it's very clear you're interested, and it's very clear that you're interested in the people in the settlement, right? Like not as a tourist, but like, how are they living their lives? How are they doing? Like what is happening? What are their lives like? And you know, you did a lot of really cool engagement with a lot of them.
Right.
Which was
I wish you would have seen me at the refugee camp yesterday. I had like 50 children.
Oh, I absolutely can see that.
I got them all clapping in time. Yep. We were doing the tongue clicking and whistling. Like a lot of them could whistle. I started whistling, and they were on it.
The kids here are so smart, and they're so good at mimicking adults, right? Like
I think I learned this like a long time ago, right? Just because people don't speak your language, because they spoke Swahili and French. I don't speak those. And they were trying real hard to speak that to me, and I'm like,
got nothing. Yep.
That's what I got. And yeah, no, just because people don't speak your language doesn't mean they're not smart as smart kids.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest tragedies that I feel about this planet right now, is that we have Einsteins and Beethovens and Pablo Picassos that are out here living in obscurity. They don't have any sort of resources to express themselves. And then they die before we have like a great physicist or a great musician or, you know, a great dancer or whatever. Yeah. You know, you need to grow people kind of like you would grow a flower, right? You can't just throw the flower onto
that's very poetic and awesome. I love that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you got to create an environment where people can become their best selves, and that's kind of like a big tragedy with all the corruption that's happened here. Because I saw this interesting data in 1985. Pretty much all of Africa, besides Uganda, Uganda was the only country that had less per capita GDP than China in 1985. So if you can imagine this.
Yep. Okay.
And then if you look at Africa today, the entire African continent has less GDP per capita than China now.
Yeah.
And it really goes to say like how well China has done in the last 30, 40 years, but it also goes to show that Uganda was always behind. Uganda is still behind, and now so is all of Africa.
Yeah.
So does this problem get better, or does this get worse as we project another 10 years?
I mean, it's interesting to me because China had its own horrible dark history, right? But it never really got colonized by anyone, whereas basically all of Africa got colonized and carved up, right?
Yeah.
And there has been very, very little investment in Africa, which is insane to me because there are a lot of really, really smart people here. It amazes me. Mobile money is a thing that amazes me here, that you can just, I mean, I know we have like Zelle and all those, Venmo and all these apps that mean that we can send money to each other if you have the app, right? You don't need that here. Here, you need a cell phone number. That's it. And you can send money to someone. You go to an MTN, you go to a mobile money person, you hand them cash, they put it on your phone, and you can send it to someone else.
Well, I did recently finish an audiobook on the history of colonization in Africa. It was only about 8.5 hours. And I can tell you most of the colonization efforts, if you're asking why, right? Why did it go down the way it did? Well, it was super horrible for a lot of horrible reasons. And I think the Africans would have kicked out the Europeans easily.
Yeah.
Well before they did, unfortunately, the Americans invented the chain Gatling gun. And they were having battles where tens of thousands of Africans would die, and the casualties on the European side would be like 300 or a dozen, and that would just be standard. But beyond that, World War I kicked off, and then all the colonies that were supposed to be, governed, or, they did all the horrible stuff to colonize them. They did all the horrible stuff to, export the goods. Right? Slavery wasn't a big thing during the colonization, but
rubber,
then World War
gold, all those things.
Rubber and gold
Oil.
were huge. And but World War I kicked off, and then suddenly it was like, nobody has time or money to deal with these colonies. Just let them fend for themselves. And then inevitably the most brutal and corrupt people got a hold of the reins, and they don't seem to have let go.
It's interesting. They don't, right? They haven't let go. And quite frankly, I mean, like we in Europe and America and now China basically have made a deal with the devil with many of these countries, because it's like, well, we'll take your precious mineral, we will, as long as you continue to sell us, now it's coltan, right? Or coltan or whatever it is in the DRC, but it used to be gold, it used to be diamonds, it used to be oil, it's still oil. We've made a deal with these governments to say, like, we will help you stay in some power, basically, if you continue to sell these things to us. And we are going to turn a blind eye to whatever you're doing to your people.
Right. So that refugee camp I visited yesterday, we'll talk more about this when we get Kellerman on here. But yeah, that refugee camp's been there since 2005. So 20 years they've been doing whatever horribleness they need to do or feel they need to do in the Congo. And it's essentially all for material wealth and things that they want to sell Westerners to build devices that they're not going to be using.
The phone we are recording this on, the mics, all those things, they all probably have conflict minerals from the DRC in them, honestly.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you have a wedding ring, or if you...
Well, those are conflict, right? I'm talking about any smart device, any cell phone, laptop, the smart boards that you hate so much, all those things have minerals probably from the DRC.
Right.
Because that's the only way to make them.
Yeah, but it's such a big world, and how do you make a difference? And I definitely want to talk to Dr. Kellerman about that, because he gave away the last half of his life to build a place like this and help people. And I'm if I can convince that one lady to go to the hospital and I can fund her surgery,
that's your bet.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I'm gonna miss my flight to Tanzania, but is that a big deal?
Yeah, I mean,
it's really not. I was listening, so part of the reason, right, is I was listening to Marcus Aurelius' meditations right before I had a standoff with a baboon, So Marcus Aurelius was whispering in my ear,
Nice.
telling me to stand my post as this baboon was coming at me, and I was like, ooh. And he ran away. I mean, I didn't have any food, so there was nothing to fight with.
You weren't particularly interesting to the baboon. Yeah.
Yeah, but he thought something was going to happen. But yeah, Marcus Aurelius is big on making the most of your life and not living for self-sufficiency, not self-pleasure, let's say. Self-sufficiency, of course, he believed in that. But
okay.
And you know, I got to thinking like, yeah, an extra 2 weeks milling around Africa, pursuing my whatever it is that I wanted to do. And that's the thing is like, I don't even know what I want to do, right? I'm looking for something that's worth doing.
Yeah.
And why would I leave here now? Because my next plan is I'm going to be way down the road at the little cabin in the woods. But that's right on the property with the Batwa development program. Mm-hmm. And so my plan is to, you know, every day volunteer my services to build houses or build whatever they need, dig a well or something.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be busy every day. I do know I have some meetings here at the hospital for some IT stuff tomorrow.
Yep.
But the intention is to be out there with the BDP so I can go volunteer with Batwa and, you know, do what needs to be done.
And it's a fun, I mean, that's also, as I stayed up there, I stayed in the gorilla houses, that's what they're called, the first time I was here.
The gorilla houses, because there's gorillas that come up right to the door.
There are gorillas that come up out of the forest sometimes. And, you know, it was a lot of fun to stay up there. It's a really, really beautiful, it's literally right on the forest.
I'm excited.
And the BDP does really amazing work. And they're the ones who, you know, buy the brick making machines and transport them across the Batwa settlements. And like, you know, I showed you like, you saw the mud and stick houses and then the new brick houses that they're building, right?
Right.
For like the Batwa. And it is fascinating to me. I mean, I was telling, this is going to come back in a second. I was telling a ton of people in the United States about Lazarus and his story and sending them videos of him on the bike and being like, isn't this, because I was like almost crying that night. Like I thought I was gonna bawl. I was just like, this little kid has gone from sitting outside of a school, being run over by a ton of people, ignored by everyone. His mom's trying to get help from him. He comes here and he's very clearly terrified of the Mzungu, right? Like,
oh, he was pretty terrified.
We all waved at him and he was just like, oh my God, you're gonna eat me. And then 2 days later.
That's what they tell the kids here. That if you don't go to bed or don't eat your vegetables, the Mzungu is going to come and eat you.
Well,
and then they go and see us, and we're like normal people. Well, I've been walking numerous times, and people have like little kids at least.
Little kids, yeah.
Will run.
But like 2 days later, he's happy, he's smiling, he's talking to everybody, and you're like, I don't understand you because this is Ruchiga, but like it's fine. And you know, 3 days later, he's on a bike.
Yeah.
And so I was sending this story to a ton of people, and I ended up actually like, 5 people sent me money to give to Jan. And I was sort of like, you don't need to, like, we're taking up collection, we're here. And all of them said, the world feels like it's on fire right now. This is a thing I can do that matters, that will make a huge difference in this little boy's life. And it costs me nothing. And it makes me feel better. And so like, I don't know how much Jan collected total, but but just what my friends sent me and family, we covered one of the prosthetics.
Nice.
Just from people.
Well done.
You know, and so it was like, and I was like, I get that, right? You get it. Like, it feels like you're making a difference here. Even like small little things, like you were saying, right? Convincing Emmy to like bring his mom to the hospital and cover that, right, expense.
Right. How much could it cost? If it means a year, 5 years more life, I mean, shoot, easy peasy. Let's do it.
I mean, that's like
that's the Dr. Kellerman mentality. I imagine he came here 20 years ago. There was no hospital. There was
no hospital.
But you see, for me, it's typical because like I'm not a doctor, so I'm like, hey, Dr. Obed, take a look at this, make this happen. And you know, I'm not the guy who can actually do it, but if I can help people get to the hospital, Lord bless.
Well, and I mean, that's like a thing. This is one of the things like you know, this project actually was supposed to be a 3-way venture with the hospital, BDP, and ABEG. And BDP has actually, BDP has been less involved, and that's on me a little bit. In part because BDP is quite well funded. They don't necessarily need my extra $2,000 in salary, but ABEG is a brand new organization. It's run by the Batwa.
ABEG, what's that again? Association
for Batwa Empowerment Group. It's run by my friend Sylvia Kokanda. She is Mutwa.
Sylvia, yes.
Yes, so she is Mutwa, which is singular of Batwa, and she employs exclusively Batwa to work in the organization. And so I ended up hiring her assistants as research assistants in order to sort of to funnel that salary into the organization, because I was asking her, like, how much does it cost to run your organization? And it's like 20 grand a year. And that's it.
It's crazy how much a little money can just
20 grand covers salary for 8 people, the cost of a boda, you know, all the work they do, rent for where the place the ABEG is housed, electricity, internet, all of it covers everything. Food, it's, you know, like everything they need for $20,000. But she often struggles to raise that much. And so often, you know, she's paying the people, but sometimes they're volunteering their time because there isn't enough money to cover their salaries.
I think this is almost a good place to wrap it up, because I think what we can say is, you know, we've all seen those advertisements on television where it's like, for $1 a day you can feed a family of Africans. I think for a while my church back home, they were doing for $50 you can send a family a cow or whatever, and they'll get the milk, and then the cow might reproduce, and then you can just change these people's lives. And it's, when you're sitting in the United States right now, or wherever you are in the world, and you think about those stories, and you're a little cynical about it, right? You're like, is that money actually going to go and help? Is this really happening? Is this a real thing? Well, I can't speak for all those organizations, but I can speak for the Kellerman Foundation, and I can speak for the BDP, and I can speak for the ABEG.
For ABEG, yep.
Exactly. $20,000 is their entire operating budget, and they can help bring a group that was oppressed and marginalized and evicted from their rightful homes, and it can help bring them into the new world so they can be self-sufficient. So if you want to donate, I'll put some links down, and you know, if you want to come out here and actually see this place for itself, I can say it's safe, people love you and appreciate you, and whatever skills you can bring to the table, they're gonna love it.
It is super safe and delightful to be here in a way that you don't feel guilty about. And also, literally when Matthew says any skills, computer skills, volunteering, like teaching people how to use the computer is a thing that you've been doing, that like I've been doing here sometimes. And like literally any...
If you're a social media manager, I need your help. Because they got a social media page for the
BCH and BDP, and they do nothing with it.
They need help.
Nothing.
Because this hospital is servicing like 1,000 people a month, right? And not everybody has cell phones, but there is a significant portion that do. Not all of them have smartphones either, but what I'm saying is like the amount of good that's happening, the amount of foot traffic that's happening, they should have 20,000 to 50,000 followers. There's stories of people, kids like Lazarus that have one leg. Those stories should be going viral. Like, because this is the place where the money can actually help.
Yeah, and know? Where a little bit of money goes a long way.
It goes so far.
A long way. And it is incredible to me. It's actually one of the things that, like, I really wish they would do. They have a communications team that tends to run through the Kellerman Foundation in terms of sending out newsletters and those kind of things. But I think that social media is a thing they have just not tapped the full potential of.
I don't think they they probably don't see the impact of social media on Western countries.
Yep.
Like just how powerful social media is.
And the people who run the Kellerman Foundation tend to be older and don't tend to use social media, and so they just don't understand, like...
So you bring the young tech guy in who's trying to build a social media following.
Yep.
Follow me, please. Or Matthew at Instagram. So check it out. I'm going to be doing this for years, and I'm not going anywhere. I mean, hopefully people follow and listen, but I'm going to be here regardless, because I do this podcast mostly for my own enjoyment and, you know, to build relationships with great and wonderful people like you. You've been an inspiration while
not nearly as much as Dr. Kellerman. I just, you know,
I think we're all learning. We're going to get there one day, because one day, you know, the Kellerman Foundation in this place is going to need the people that love it. And
to stick around, that's right.
And that'll be us. We'll be here picking up the straws and making sure it continues.
And you can too.
Yeah.
Highly recommend.
If you feel like you're stuck in your dead-end job that's not going anywhere and not helping anybody, you can come out here, barter for your room and board, stay for free potentially, and do some good for people that, you know, are going to be so happy to have you.
Yeah.
And I am happy to have you, Katie.
Oh, happy to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Adios.
Bye.